on this computer. All right. All right. Let me share my screen with you. Now, I do want to put in as a side note, as a um, so where's the button? There it is. Um, as a note that much of the information in here, well, some of it, I leave blank. Like certain things, certain numbers, like how long is needed for this, how long is needed for that. I leave that out intentionally because I want you to look the information up on your own. Anybody who had me for laws, rules, and regs, FUN 220, I would have all the answers at that time because I had them all written in my notes and I could just read them right off. If they're not sitting in front of me, I mean, I can come up with it. It takes me a second to think about it, but in any sense, you should be looking these things up on your own. Now, all right, so here's where everything comes from, right? You don't need to remember these numbers. They're not going to ask you what's on 1336 point blah 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 blah. And what these stand for is NJSA is New Jersey Statutes Annotated, and NJAC is New Jersey Administrative. Oh, what does the C stand for? I should know this. Administrative. See, that's one of the things. If I had it in my notes, I would know it immediately, and I'm blanking on it. Administrative code. As simple as it could be, and I just couldn't come up with it right there. Anyway, you will find that the statutes are shorter than the regulations. The reason being is a statute is written by a legislative body and therefore has to be changed by that legislative body, whereas the regulations are written by the state board, and that's where you're going to find the vast majority of it. If you ask a senator or the governor of the state, like, oh, well, what are your feelings on what instruments should be in a prep room? They would have no idea. They don't know what an aneurysm hook is. They have no idea, and nor should they. And so that's where you'll find the regs are much longer. And I'm not super happy about this, but the state has gone and changed the way that they lay these things out. Like it used to be, you would just click on the link and go to it, and it would give you the whole regulation or the entirety of the statute, and now it's sort of breaking it down. It's almost anybody who's familiar with Pennsylvania, they've been doing it this way for a couple of years, where like each individual regulation gets its own page. You can read it all, but instead of being in a book format or one solid PDF, it's multiple pages. It's all still accessible. They just create separate hoops to jump through on it, which is ridiculous, but it is what it is. So there's a link down here as well. I believe, and I have not tested this link. I did put that in the spring, but they every time I think that it's right, they change it on me. If you can't find it, just Google New Jersey State Board Mortuary Science. It'll bring you right to their page, and it's got a subheading on there, statutes and regulations. You click that, or it might say laws, rules, and regs. In any sense, it's obvious. And you click on that, and you're good to go. Now, all right, and again, this is just really more of a page to keep for future days when you need to look something up. They're not going to ask you, oh, well, where exactly is the medical examiner statutes? Where would you find those? Where would you find the administrative code for health and vital statistics? No, they're not going to ask you that, but this is where you find all of it. Like I said, this is more of a reference page just to save in case you need to look these things up. That being said, you should know about these things. I don't think you'll see a huge amount of information about medical examiners, but advanced funeral payments and trusts, I can almost guarantee you will. Corporate names you very well might as well. The idea of what are you allowed to name your funeral home, and what, you're pretty much allowed to name it anything, but you have to clear it with the board. You can't just decide one day, oh, I don't like the word funeral anymore. So I own Brand X Funeral Home, and I'm going to change it to Brand X Memorial Home. You're allowed to do that, but you got to file the appropriate paperwork first. You can't just go out and change it. So little things like that. So differences that you need to keep in your mind. The difference between a license and a certificate of registration. Remember, the COR is for the building and the license for the individual. The COR is renewed on a biannual period, as is the license. The license is on odd years. The COR is on even years, and we'll double back on that later on. Difference between a death certificate and a burial permit, and the lines have really been blurred on this. I was just talking about this in class the other day, about how the lines have been absolutely blurred on this. It used to be you would get it, and I'm all in favor of the EDRS system. I am not saying I'm not, but you used to get a paper death certificate. You would get it completed. You would get a doctor's signature, cause of death, manner of death, all that good stuff. You would then take it to a government official who would review it and approve it, and then hand you a permit, and whether that be a burial permit, disposition permit, a transit permit, whatever. Um, but now it's just you put everything in DRS and you just hit print. And like I said, I think it's wildly convenient, but it does blur the lines a little bit, at least in an academic setting. Difference between a permit and a transit permit. And again, I asked this in class, like, how can you get it? Does it just magically change by clicking a button and saying it's a transit permit? Yeah, exactly. You would think there'd be more involved in it than that, but there's not. And I'm not saying that here again, I'm happy that there's not more involved in it. Just knowing the state of New Jersey, I'm surprised there's not more involved with it. All right, license. What do you need a license for in this state? Now, you need a license to arrange or pre-arrange. Now, I know some of you be sitting there going, well, I'm an intern. I can make arrangements. Absolutely. But that you're doing that under somebody's supervision. They need to review the statement of funeral goods and services before it is executed. But like my wife works at a funeral home, and well, she's been working with me for uh, darn near 20 years. And she could make arrangements in a second. She's not allowed to, and they don't ask her to, obviously. But she would absolutely know what to do. But she's not allowed to do that. She can't make arrangements. She can't sit down with the family and do that. Um, Sign a death certificate. You need to be licensed to sign a DC. And again, this is one of those things that when it was a paper death certificate, I remember the first one I signed, it was a big to-do for me. Like I sat down and wrote my signature real nice. And now it's just you click a button on EDRS. But still, you had to be licensed to get that approval to be on EDRS, to have the system set up to click that button. To embalm. And here again, as an intern, yes, you're allowed to embalm, but you're doing it under the supervision of the manager or whoever your preceptor is. Um, at the point of disposition. Now, this was relaxed during the pandemic, specifically because there were so many bodies coming down here for a relatively short period of time. It was bonkers. North Jersey got hit real hard, and New York got hit real hard. And they shipped like truckloads of bodies down here. It was wild, man. To get into a crematory took like 3 weeks sometimes. It was bonkers. And during that time, they relaxed it, but now they've snapped it back and said, no, 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 you can't do that. Like you have to be licensed to take somebody to the point of disposition, whether that be a cemetery, a crematory, or whatever. You have to be a licensee to do that. Now, supervising visitation, no, absolutely not. Dressing and casking, making a removal, no. Running a memorial service, with ashes, with cremated remains. No, a non-licensed person can do the whole kit and caboodle, even if, let's say, you're taking an urn from the funeral home to a church to a cemetery to be buried. Perfectly legal for a non-licensed individual to do that. Though the state of New Jersey and really the federal government as well views the cremated remains as not being a human body. If you remember, and this is more for a national question than I think you would see in the jurisprudence, but a dead human body, it has to be dead, it has to be human, it has to be not fully disintegrated. Well, cremated remains are fully disintegrated, so they're no longer considered human remains. That being said, you can't just take somebody's cremated remains at the funeral home and say, oh, these people are jerks, they didn't pay us, and just toss them in the trash or something. No, they still have a very large inherent value to them, but they're not considered dead human remains by the state. All right, license renewal. This is what I was just talking about a second ago. Remember, it's done biannually for both the funeral home and for the individual. And on odd and even years, the funeral home, odd years, it's the funeral director. And again, the way I remember this, every funeral director I have ever met, It's always been an oddball. And I say that not even a pejorative. Both of my parents, well, my father was, he's long since dead. My mom's still a funeral director. I have a brother who's a funeral director. I'm a funeral director. My wife works at a funeral home. We're trying to get her license, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, everybody I know in this industry is a little odd in one way or another, and that's how I sort of remember that. Renewal expectations, so continuing education. This is something you need to know. How many credits do you need? And it's 10, but what are the specifics with that? How many do you need in laws, rules, and regs? How many do you need in OSHA, et cetera, and so forth? How many are you allowed to have on marketing and merchandising? And that's all in the regulation. That's all spelled out in black and white. License lapse. Now, there has been development with this in the last 6 years now, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. If it's outside of 5 years, that's where things change. Inside of 5 years, and we'll get to that in some of these later slides, it's much easier to get your license back, but we'll talk about that in just a bit. Now, in 2019, like I said, a bunch of things were changed. Now, I know a whole bunch of things have been changed over the past couple of weeks. And if you're not familiar with everything, like for one, New Jersey is doing away with the national board exam, which blows my mind. We're submitting questions to the state board as well as the folks at Eastwick are, I believe McAllister. They probably reached out to other schools as well as they should. But yeah, as of they're shooting for November of next year, to have it completed with my understanding of my guess being it being deployed in early 2027, but I don't know. That's all, we'll see what happens with that in the future. And I say that not to say dodge the NBE because this test hasn't even been written, won't even be available for more than a year. I'm just saying, down the road, and I hope everybody passes the national first time through. If you struggle with it or something, and it has been that long, there will be another option, at some point. I don't know how difficult that test will be. And I don't know what that's going to do with our accreditation, because that's really my big concern, but that's another conversation for another day. Now, pre-need providers in 2019, and there's a whole bunch of other slides of things that they did change in 2019. Because by now they will absolutely be represented on the test. Like in 2020, when we were doing this, I was like, I don't know. By now, yeah, it'll definitely be represented. Pre-need providers must monitor attendance and ensure completion of the lessons. If you've ever been to any of the CEU classes, if they're done by like the association, you have your little name tag on. If you step out of the room to use the bathroom or to take a phone call or something, you can't be gone for more than 10 minutes. And if you are, they void it and they just go, nah, you get nothing. I know I do continuing ed and I just do it on Zoom, but I have to monitor everybody who's in and make sure that they're there the whole time and all this other stuff. And it's just what the state expects of you. And the CEU instructor must maintain their records for 5 years. Again, one of those things, anytime you see a time frame attached to anything, make a note of that time frame. Inactive license. Now, this is something that people used to do all the time. It was if somebody was older, but they don't want to really work as a funeral director anymore, but still putz around, keep their name on the sign and stuff. They used to go inactive. And as an inactive licensee, you couldn't make arrangements, you couldn't embalm, you couldn't be the sole licensee because you're not really a licensee at appointed disposition or anything like that. It was just done for advertising purposes. I know a buddy of mine who's licensed way down in South Jersey. His grandfather, I think, had initially done this, and I think now he just let the license go. And I know my mom is thinking about doing this next licensing cycle, but it used to be you could just keep an inactive license and then keep it in the ads. They did away with all of that. You're either licensed or you're not. That's sort of, I think, is a little cleaner. Now, license lapse. Here's what that slide. Here's what they changed a few years back. It used to be less than 5 years, complete all delinquent continuing education, up to 25 hours. You figure 5 years, 10 hours per licensing cycle, and that's 2.5 licensing cycles, so it'd be 25 credits. That would be the maximum. Now they go, well, let's just cut it back a bit. You only need, and you'd have to pay all of the fees as well. So you'd have to pay, 2.5 of whatever the fee is. I forget what it was when I renewed. It was three something to renew my license. Um, yeah, they said no, no, no. We're going to drop that back and make it a little bit easier. One of the very few times they do. New Jersey now only requires fees and CEUs for the current and previous licensing period. So instead of being like 2.5, it would just be two sets. This one and the one previous to that. In practice, and I have not seen this in practice yet. But in practice, my assumption would be if somebody license lapsed for, let's say, 4 years, they would come back and go, okay, you need to get 10 credits to get it up and going. And in this licensing cycle, make sure to get another 10 credits. But like I said, that's me guessing at it. But they did away with that standard there. But yeah, 25 hours and all that. They just did away with that. And if it's more than 5 years, and we'll get to that in a second, I'm getting ahead of myself. More than 5 years, what it used to be, it was codified. It was okay, you have to do a mini internship, and they didn't even specify how. It was like, yeah, 3 months to a year. Well, quite a variation there. They just said, no, 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 we're just going to do this on a state or on a case by case basis. So if your license has lapsed for more than 5 years, then you got to contact the state board and see what they say. They just, I don't know. Maybe they'll just go, get the continuing ed. Maybe they'll say you need to do a mini internship. I don't know. My guess would be it will vary based on how long a person was licensed prior and how long they were away. And if you were licensed for 1 year, and you move away and you just don't practice at all for 20 years, and then you come back and they go, I want my license back. They'll probably go, yeah, you probably need to do an internship and whatever. But if you practice for like 30 years or something, then you were gone for 6 and you come back, I think they would have it a little bit more lenient in their approach. But that's me, again, guessing at it. All right, what do you know about record keeping? Funeral home files, right? How long do the files have to be kept? And again, this one I do remember off the top of my head. It's 7 years. The initial year, 365 days behind us. What is today? October the 8th? Yeah, it's the 8th. Yeah, geez, 2 days from now, my daughter's turning 10. I should know that. Anyhow, so October the 8th of 2024, you would have to have records going back to that point. Um, Going back any further than that, the previous 6 years, you can store off of like off premises. If you want to, I don't know, if you have so many records that they just take up space, okay, I'm going to take out a storage area and keep them there. That's perfectly fine. If the inspector shows up and they want to see your record and they want to see something that's more than a year old, you can tell them to wait for 2 weeks. Now, I know in practically speaking, and from a practical sense, I should say, the every funeral home I know keeps records on premises going back some to the 1800s. But okay, in theory, you can keep the last 6 years off premise. But again, what goes into that funeral home file is what you need to know. And here's where they get into the devil's in the details. Things like, okay, do you need to keep a clergy record, a record of the clergy? Well, if the funeral home paid for them on behalf of the family, you do. But if the family just lined it up themselves, no, you don't. So there's a couple areas of variation there. So it's really good to go back and double check these. And like I said, this is why I wanted to do it today because I believe the test is next Friday, and it should give everybody time to go through it. And like I said, the regulations and the statutes, you got to know them. And New Jersey goes overkill on these things and writes way too many of them. Um, Itemization. How do you prepare a statement of funeral goods and services with a discount, right? And this is both a New Jersey standard, but it's also a federal standard, right? This goes back to the FTC and the idea that, like, okay, in New Jersey, for example, they changed some of the laws, and this there's a whole lot tied into it. But one of the things that practitioners came back with was, since you've changed these laws, can't we just write up? It was, you know, what it was? It was something about packaging, and you didn't need to include a certain package or itemize it in a certain way. And I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but everybody came back and said, well, look, as a result of this, we should be able to write up a statement of funeral goods and services. If you've got somebody and you're cutting them a discount, you go, okay, I'll write it up as a direct cremation plus a memorial service. Well, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're still not allowed to do that. And that's an FTC thing. That's about fully disclosing everything that's on a funeral bill. And a direct cremation is just that. It is a direct cremation with no services whatsoever. If somebody wants a memorial service, you can write them up as the basic service fee, transfer, storage of remains if you charge for that, and then whatever your individual charges are, right? Now, there's nothing saying that you can't take that same figure that it would have been and discount it down. Like, let's say your basic service fee is $3,000. And then to use the funeral home for a memorial service, let's say it's, I don't know, $1,000. So we're now at $4,000. And transfer of remains and everything else, let's just say, is comes out to 5,000, right? Now your direct cremation charge is maybe $2,200. And if you're going to write it up with the 2,200 plus, let's say, I don't know, 500 or 1,000, we'll keep it at 1,000 to use the building for a memorial service, kind of large charge for that, but whatever. That would bring it to 3,200 versus the 5,000. And again, I'm making these numbers up on the fly, right? So you are allowed to write it up if you put in the basic service fee and everything else, the transfer remains, bop, 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 and then discount it so it comes down to that charge that you would have been by charging the direct cremation plus a memorial service. You're allowed to discount it down. And if you own the place, do whatever you want. I mean, legally, you obviously, if you're discounting, talk to your boss first or the owner or whatever. If you are the owner, you'd make that call on your own. But that's the way that the state would expect you to discount something down. It's not to write something improperly, which if you wrote up a direct cremation with a memorial service, that would be improperly writing it. You would be out of line with both New Jersey and federal law on that. And saying that, I know a million funeral directors who have done that and probably still do it. I know I did it a number of times myself, and then I eventually one of my colleagues said something to me about it. I was like, "Oh, you're 100% right." This is before I was teaching, and it's like, "Yeah, I guess you're right." So yeah, so then I went to that just out of a precaution. Yeah, FTC forms for New Jersey compliance, right? Your general price list, casket price list, outer burial container price list. What's required by the FTC and what's required by the state of New Jersey, right? Like the FTC will require things like, a telephone number and an address. Whereas New Jersey requires much more. You have to have the manager's name and their license number on it, the full address, the telephone number, all of that needs to be listed on all of your forms. Also in New Jersey, don't forget there is that multi-disclosure location. Whereas if you own multiple funeral homes, and the statute reads, no, is it? No, I think it's a regulation. I think the reg reads that if you or anybody else in this funeral home owns 50% or more of another funeral home, then you have to disclose that in your general price list. Now, for the longest time, I was the owner of 3 funeral homes, right? And the way that it broke down was I owned 40%, my brother owned 40%, my mom owned 20%. We're like, great, none of us own more than 50%. Well, no, that doesn't count. That was us owning 40, 40, and 20 of a business, and that business owned 100% of the funeral home. So yeah, we absolutely had to put that disclosure on there. Not as if we were looking to hide it. It didn't matter to us one way or another, but that's basically the way the law is. They don't care about the breakdown of your partnership agreement. They care that the information is being made available to the public. Um, Prep room expectations, right? The equipment, the structure, prohibitions, right? I've got the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of it. Like I said, I added these slides. You can just take a look at them on your own. How much of this you'll see on the test, I do not know. I've never farmed questions for this. Students have come back and said, "Oh, it was hard, it was easy, whatever." But I've never like farmed questions or anything, and rightfully so. That the state board, I think, would be a little ticked off at me if I did that. Actually, it's not the next slide. It's a later slide. Um, anyway, and I probably should have had it as the next slide. So my apologies there. But this is another important concept. What's required with funeral homes as far as the living quarters and prep room location and things like that, right? So the living quarters have to be separate and distinct from the funeral home, right? Completely separate and distinct. Normally, the state normally looks that it's divided by floors. Like I grew up in a funeral home. Top two floors were where we lived. The bottom floor was the funeral home. Complete and noticeable separation between the business and the living quarters. This funeral home here, actually, I looked at this place a couple of years ago. I kind of regret not pursuing it now, but it was what it was. It was a weird setup in that the funeral home was over here. Like this side building was the funeral home, and this whole house here was just the house. But there was a connection between the two, and from what my understanding was, a lot of people would just go in that front door and sort of go through their living room into the funeral home. Yeah, no, that's absolutely prohibited. Not allowed to do it. And I think they were able to get around it with the state because there was a door here that could be locked. But from what I understand, it was just always open and just people sort of came and went out of the house during services or viewings or whatever. But, you know, now, likewise, here's another funeral home. I used to work at this place. It was over in PA. It was a beautiful, beautiful funeral home. It was a very old building, and it looked small. Look at it, but the viewing room was enormous, man. Because you see over here, see there's this whole little side building that you don't see, where that was all an addition that they put on. It was beautiful. I mean, and the place was built in the 1700s, and even the addition looked like it was built then. I mean, I must have cost them an arm and a leg. But that's a separate conversation altogether. Now, I know this is in PA, but I'm still gonna use it to illustrate New Jersey's laws. The prep room was over here, this carriage house, this little white building was where the prep room was, which was great for us as employees. We would just hide there all day. We would turn a prep into an 8-hour project because we didn't, they weren't going to let us go home early if we finished embalming. And we would sit up there and like play cards and stuff. And then somebody came in, we'd be like hiding everything. And whatever. I mean, we did a lot of work and we were very dedicated. But if it was a slow afternoon, we'd go over there and play Texas Hold'em for an hour or two. Now, the issue here is in New Jersey, they say if your prep room is separated from the building proper and it is on a separate piece of property, it cannot be divided by some obstruction. You can't have a whole thing of trees between the two or a real high fence. You have to have a clear and obvious point of egress between the two. So even if there was a big fence or a forest of trees, so long as you have an opening between the two, and that's fine, right? So if I pull up, let me pull up, I don't even know how to get to this. I don't wait. 1 second. Oh, tools, blah, 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 blah. No, I just want to get the whiteboard. Where is the whiteboard hiding? Chat, layout, annotate, control, show meeting, more. Maybe it's in more rooms. They change all this stuff on me. I can't find the dumb thing. Anyway, all I was going to do is draw a square on there and point out, the what I'm talking about here. Darn it. Because it was always under share, and now it's not. Wait, 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 wait. Oh, wait, I might have found it. As background, side by side, share sound. No. Documents, maybe. Oh, whiteboard. Here we go. Stop share. Yeah, I still want to, but all right. So I'm doing the whiteboard now. You folks should be able to see this. There we go. All right. So let's say you've got, oh, Geez, a big property here, right? I see somebody's mouse moving around there. So let's say here is the funeral home, right? And let's say much like the what we were looking at before, separate building, a carriage house, and here's the prep room, right? Now let's say this is on, 125 Main Street, and the way that townships do things, and sometimes um different properties get merged. So that's 125 where the funeral home is. And let's say because of the parking lot and everything else, they absorbed another property, and this is 127 Main Street, right? So since it occupies two different properties, it cannot have, and that's a terrible tool on my part. Anyway, it cannot have anything completely separating it, right? Like if you had a whole bunch of trees or a fence or something like that, um, then you would have to get a whole separate certificate of registration for that prep room, meaning it would have to have everything that a funeral home is required to have, a viewing room, restroom facilities, etc., and so forth. And likewise, this building over here would need to work a prep room into it somewhere with everything required of the prep room. Now, so long as no, that whole thing just disappeared on me. But so long as you have a break in there, like let's say you've got a whole big fence or trees or something, but it stops there and you've got this clear pathway across between the two, perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. I know I'm really getting into the minutia here, but again, these are the odd things they get asked you questions about. Yes. Screens. Nope. Yeah, there we are. Okay. So now we should be back to where we were. Whoops. All right. So yeah, you see, this is all in the same. There's a clear line of egress across there, so they wouldn't have had an issue. It's just like I said, you see all these trees. If all these trees were right here blocking that from here, then it wouldn't work legally. They would have to, either move the prep room into the building proper, or make the prep room into a building that had everything that they could at least in theory use for a funeral. Like I worked for a funeral home that had multiple locations, and they had this one location down in Camden. They would do a handful of calls a year out of there. And it was only a couple miles away from the main location. So any embalmings we did out of the main location. They had a prep room there, but man, you could barely fit in there. It was a closet with a folded up metal table and embalming machine and like one aneurysm hook, one trocar, one of everything that you needed. They just stored there just, for inspections. All right, so here's the requirements of what you need in the funeral home or in the prep room. Um, Requirements in the building: a leak-proof trash can, an instrument cabinet, disinfecting agents, drainage or viscera bucket, embalming table, porcelain or metal with a drainage opening in the lower end, a hydro aspirator with approved vacuum breaker, electric aspirator or other approved aspirator. My God, they get into the minutia with this. A waste sink, which I'm glad they changed that. They used to call it a slop sink, and I always hated the terminology. A waste sink sounds much better. Waste sink with a minimum, this was important, minimum of 2-inch drain. I don't know why that's so important, but they made a big to-do about it when I prepped for it, and I do remember seeing a question or two about that. Now, that was a quarter of a century ago. The test I took, I'm certain will be much different than the test you took, but that has in the past come up. A wash basin with hot and cold running potable water. Remember, potable is drinking water. Like you can drink potable water. Not that you want to drink, oh, I'm thirsty while I'm prepping. Let me get a nice glass of water while I'm no, nobody wants to do that. And again, every funeral home has heard the old wives' tale about a new employee that was hired and made coffee for everyone. Like, wait, how'd you get it filled to that? Oh, I just used that hose in the prep room, and it was the aspirating hose that they filled it up with. I'm pretty sure that never happened, but I've heard that story. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 50 times. Um, one leak-proof container for storing dirty linens for each licensee and trainee, protection, apparel, and/or equipment as required by all applicable standards of OSHA. One container of hardening compound, one set metal or rubber drain tubes. Large, medium, small. One new. Watch this. Just got off work. Yeah, I'm recording it, and what I'll do is I'll post this on the YouTube page. I'll get the link for you. I forget. It's MCCC Funeral Service, I think is what it is, because that's just where I put lectures and stuff like that, all of which are protected. Like, these I make open to the public just so that, if you come across it, you don't need to log in. You don't need a special thing to get it. I don't need to email it to everybody. It's just out there in the open for you to watch. Um, one set of metal or rubber drain tubes, large, medium, small, large, medium, or small. One set metal injection tubes, large, medium, small. One aneurysm needle or aneurysm hook. And again, after you get licensed, you'll never call it an aneurysm needle again. One large trocar, one small trocar, one scalpel, one pair of scissors, two hemostats, two forceps, one hypodermic syringe, hypodermic needles, assorted. They don't tell you exactly what, just assorted. Suture needles, suture thread, an electrically powered embalming machine, which I would argue you really don't need. You could say, like, I just inject with gravity, but whatever, you'd still have to have a machine according to the state of New Jersey. Um, and finally, this is an odd one. We'll come back to this one. Clear white or flesh-colored adhesive tape. That's a bonkers one. And that was one case that went to the state board where a knee-jerk reaction, and we'll talk about that in a bit. I have a different slide about that. All instruments and appliances used in embalming shall be thoroughly cleansed and disinfected immediately after the conclusion of each case, meaning you should keep your prep room looking decent. I've been in some that, oh man, you want a wretch just walking into the place. Oof. Anyway, if they walk in and let's say there's a whole bunch of dirty instruments that just have dried blood and stuff on them that clearly have not been cleaned, yeah, they're going to issue most likely they'll issue a fine or a violation of some sort. The potable water supply. All owners and managers shall ensure that the potable water supply is not open to the danger of contamination from any sort. The requirement in A above may be satisfied by the installation of any approved hydroaspirator and such other devices as may be necessary to accomplish the purpose of this rule. Any infraction of this rule shall be reported immediately to the board. So here's the idea. Their concern is specifically with aspiration. That's why any aspirator you look at tends to be built as like a double breaker hydroaspirator. And what that means is it has two sort of locking units in it that prevent water from getting back up into the system. And the fear is this. Let's say you had a funeral home in a strip mall, which would be weird, but nothing illegal about it. And you're embalming somebody, you're aspirating them. The aspirator gets clogged up, which it does happen on occasion, and all of a sudden the water kicks back into the system, and the aspiration, the aspirate, everything you're aspirating out of the body goes up into the potable water supply, up into the pipes. Now, what's going to happen with the businesses that are neighboring this funeral home? Like you could very well have contaminated water. Not too long ago, my wife and I went on a kick of watching Quincy, which is this goofy show from the 70s. It's so cheesy, it's worth watching. You can find it on like MeTV, one of these stations that plays stuff from the 50s and the 60s and whatnot. But that actually happened on an episode of it. It wasn't via funeral home. It was somebody who dropped rotten meat in something, and again, they didn't have a quote unquote double breaker system on it, and the water supply got all like infested, and people were getting sick from a water fountain and all this other stuff. And it was things like that that was really what spirited in this type of legislation. Burial preparation performed in a separate room. No embalming or other preparation for burial or disposition of a dead human body shall be performed in any funeral establishment except in a room set aside exclusively and approved by the board for such purpose. Meaning, you cannot have a prep room that you go, oh, when we have a viewing, we'll just pull everything out. We'll make it into the ladies' restroom. Oh, you can't. Oh, no, it has to be solely for that. Nobody would want to use that prep room or that prep room. Nobody would want to use that bathroom. And I know I shouldn't vape during these, but I don't care because I'm at home, I'm not at school, and I do this for free, so whatever. All right, FTC telephone price disclosures. Remember, everything in the FTC rule is also fair game. Um, in a minute, remind me if I don't do it. Somebody remind me. I'll drop into the chat. I do have the FTC rule for funeral homes digitized, and I can drop that in there. It makes a real good review for both the national and the JP. So new for 2019, the manager may designate an employee, even if unlicensed, to provide price information on the phone. Responding to questions concerning information not on the price list shall be referred to a licensee or intern, meaning my wife takes a phone call. This happens to her all the time. She's not licensed, but she's allowed to tell somebody what the price is. Like somebody calls up and goes, well, we're shopping around. How much for a direct cremation? She would pick up the price list and say it's whatever the cost is. She can even like she's not supposed to go into anything that's not on the price list, like the cost of the crematory, outside charges, things like that, cash advance items. She's not supposed to go into that because it's not specifically listed in the price list. I would bet that she normally does, but I don't know. I've told her many times not to. She doesn't listen to me all the time, though. Multiple ownership. This is what I was talking about before. A person who owns, and this is strictly New Jersey. You're not going to see this on the national. At least you shouldn't. A person who owns 50% or greater interest of this registered mortuary also owns 50% or greater interest in the following registered mortuaries in the state of New Jersey, along with the name of the funeral home and the municipality and a description enough to be able to identify it. Um, in 2019, they switched this to say it just needs to be on the GPL. Prior to that, if you had multiple price lists, it had to be on all of the price lists. And they said, all right, that's silly. If it's on the GPL, everybody's getting it. That's fine. Great. So yeah, it's and the fear, the reason they had this on there is there have been times I know a funeral director that bought his competition out, left the name as it was, eventually merging the two, right? Because the competition was right down the street. But the fear is that in a situation like that, somebody walks into funeral home A and they say, how much is this? They write it all up and they say it's $8,000. And the family says, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't pay a penny more than 6,500. They storm out the door. In the meantime, the funeral director gets on the phone, calls the other funeral home, says, hey, don't charge her more than 6,500. They go, okay. They walk in, say, how much is it, everything? They go, it's 6,500. They go, wow, that's great. The exact amount that I wanted to pay. That's what they're trying to keep from happening. I doubt that happens a lot. Seems very unlikely, but nevertheless, they put a lot of these rules in. I don't know. Sometimes I think the state board has too much time on their hands. Now, this is another interesting thing, and this is changing now, and I could see this changing again in a couple of years based on because the laws have to be reassessed. I think the sunset statute says every 7 years, maybe every 8 years, and I could definitely see this being updated the next time around. Mortuary use issues. Now, it used to be the mortuary shall not be used as a site for recovering organs or tissues, including DNA. They said, nope, you can use it for an autopsy, but nothing else, which again made no sense. With the advent of all of these groups out there that can like store DNA and whatnot, they said, all right, fine, that's fair. You can do that. You may, and you always could collect a lock of hair. That was always allowed. They expanded that to say you can collect DNA via cheek swab, nail clippings, and/or blood collection. Maybe the site of an examination to determine the cause or manner of death, meaning you can have a private autopsy done there. You always could. But they extended it to say, all right, if you want to, take a cheek swab or nail clippings or blood collection, fine, go ahead and do it. Some people are, again, saving DNA. I don't know. Maybe they'll clone somebody in the future. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Food in the mortuary. This is another sticking point, and I would go through and ask everybody their opinion on this because I'd love to hear them because it really does run the gamut. I am in favor of it myself, but that's just me. Prior to 2019, no food whatsoever in the funeral home at all. Doesn't matter whether it was a cup of coffee or a donut. No, you were not allowed. And down now in 2019, they said, no, let's relax that a little bit. Now they say you may serve or allowed to be served food and beverages. However, it has to be non-alcoholic, right? And it cannot be prepared at the funeral home. You can't have somebody cooking up a six-course meal at the funeral home and then serving it to people. Now, again, I even find that a little strange. I don't know. I grew up in a funeral home. I ate many meals there, but whatever. Um, and this is basically this is the solution they came up with. All right, you can serve food or allow it to be served, just no alcohol and don't cook it at the funeral home. And that's fine. Now, by cooking at the funeral home, it doesn't mean you can't have like a coffee machine, which, I suppose in a way, you cook coffee. I mean, you warm it up. You're allowed to do that. You just can't cook actual food. Hmm. If you close a funeral home, another important concept here. Um, New as of 2019, you must show evidence to the state board that the EDRS account is closed. Now, there's more that you have to do when you're closing a funeral home. I think I have a slide on it later on. But there's a whole litany of things you have to do. You must inform the state board of the customer security alarm system. Oh no, is our alarm system going off? Oh no, hold on, I gotta take this. Yeah, hi, hello. Sorry about that. That was the security company, and my daughter was kids, man. You love them. You love them to the moon and back. My God, if they do not try to destroy everything in your house. I'm sure I did the same damn thing at that age, but whatever. My daughter was screwing with something on the one of the windows and screwed up something with the alarm system. So that was the alarm company calling, and I needed to take that in fear if I didn't answer it, the police would show up here or something. So anyhow, so as of 2019, you must show evidence to state board that the ERS account is closed. You must inform the state board of the location and individual in charge of funeral home records, and that's a new one. Before you could shut the funeral home, and put cover up the sign and everything else, turn off the telephone number and whatever. But they didn't make you specify where the records were going, and this makes sense. You call up your competitor and you go, "Well, I'm calling it quits. I'm retiring and moving to Florida, and I have a very big property, and CVS is buying it, and they're going to put a CVS in here, or Rite Aid, or whatever, a Wawa, if you will, right? And will you take my records? Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, it's if my competitor called me, I think I would do that just out of curiosity, looking through the records. To say the truth. Will I be able to watch this? Uh, Lost audio. Can you still not hear me? Okay, Steve's phone is saying that you lost audio. Can you folks hear me? Okay, so you're Hayden saying it's fine. Okay, you're saying you can. All right. We did lose audio for a second there. Steve, maybe you missed it. I did have to take a phone call, so I did have to mute out for a second. So maybe it was just then. Um, yeah, anyway, so yeah, you that funeral home would have to hold those records for 7 years, with the first year being available immediately if the state board showed up, and the other 6 years they would have to get to them within 2 weeks if they stored them off premise, which some funeral homes, I guess, opt to do. Intern, the preceptor qualifications, how many interns? This is always fun. Sorry, up to another device. Not a problem. I just want to make sure you're hearing me and getting everything in here, and um, intern regulation stuff that you have to know, things that you think you would know, right? Because you're an intern, right? The preceptor qualifications. A preceptor has to be licensed at least 2 years. Um, and there's also another one having to do with arrests that we'll get to in a bit. But that's really sort of a rarity, but we'll talk about that in a bit. How many interns may a funeral home have? It is two. And the minimum amount of calls that a funeral home can have is 25 a year, not including infants or newborns, right? So here's the logic behind that. The idea was always, and prior to, I forget when they changed the law, like '05, '06, when they added the 25 sets of funeral arrangements, all it was prior to that was 75 funerals, 75 embalmings. So the laws were written in like the 1940s and 50s, and at that time it was not uncommon for everybody getting into the funeral business to live in a funeral home or to be legacy. And now it's like the opposite. But let's go back to the 1950s or 60s or whatever. Somebody would get done high school and then have to do the 2 years of schooling to get the 60 credits, and then the 1 year of mortuary school working out to the 3 years, and the funeral home does 25 calls a year, and the intern does everything on all 25 of them. He or she works the funeral, does the embalming. They weren't counting the arrangements back then, but if they do the embalming and the funeral and all 25 each year for 3 years, they would hit the 75 and 75. That's the spirit behind that law. With the interns, I don't understand why this is, but a funeral home can only have two. I've always felt that, like, I've seen funeral homes doing maybe like six, seven, 800 calls a year. Like, they would have room for more than two interns. I mean, what? I don't know. It just seems silly to me, but it is what it is. Um, Now, intern specifics. Remember that, you have to do, obviously, I'm sure all of you know, you have to do 75 funerals, 75 embalmings, 25 sets of funeral arrangements, right? Now, the time that you have to do this, now I got to find where I had that whiteboard again. There we go. That's going to yell at me. Yes, I do want to continue. Does a nice plain blank. Okay, here we go. Right, let me erase all. Oh, wait, that's not our eraser. Oh, for the love of Pete. There it is. You see Hayden's PC kicking around here. And I don't care, Hayden, if you want to write something on here, knock yourself out. So, all right. Um, Shapes. No, I want letters. Where's my typing? There we go. All right. So, hey, girls, what you doing? I am. That's fine. What's going on? Well, okay, mommy's not being mean. You two are obviously being bad and getting in trouble. Look, go downstairs. Come here, give me a hug. Give me a hug. It's all right. I'll be down in a couple of minutes. All right.
What are you live with?
I'm live with students who are learning. They're going to take the jurisprudence exam.
Recording.
I'm recording, but they're okay, girls.
Hi.
See the fun of working from home. Okay.
Daughter.
Okay, they figured that out. Go downstairs, kiddo. I'm at work. Go downstairs. Close the door behind you, please. Thank you. Sorry, they are all wound up. Because like I said, my oldest Winifred is turning 10 on Friday, so they're just all wound up. Okay, why am I not getting I want the pen, I want the text here. So, all right. So what they're getting at here is the internship. Okay, when you apply to become an intern, by default, it is 2 years, right? If needed, they will give you a third year. Now, if during that initial 2 years of schooling, right? If during that time you are doing the initial 60 credits, right? Let's say you get done high school, or let's say you went into the workforce for 10, 15, 20, 30 years and then tried, well, I want to become a funeral director. It happens all the time, I have lots of students who do that. Um, let's say you come back, you've got no college credit while you are getting those initial 60. This right here, this time, this would be the concurrent period, right? While you were getting the initial 60 credits, right? That's in that initial 2 years. And that's the only time that is considered a concurrent internship, right? If you had already done schooling, if you had already done the 60 credits, or you already had a bachelor's or master's or whatever, we've had students through with PhDs before, right? Well, they're not doing this concurrent period because they already have the 60 credits. They're just doing this last year of mortuary school. So it's not considered a concurrent internship. However, during that time, they are concurrently going to school and doing their internship. So go figure. But this is the way the state of New Jersey views it. The concurrent internship is just during the initial 2 years while you're getting the 60 credits. Or if you come in with 30 credits and you start that, whatever, right? Now, this concurrent internship is only in place if you're registered with the funeral home. If you're just somebody out collecting 60 credits and you're not working in the funeral business, it doesn't matter. You do whatever you want. But if you are working at a funeral home and if you are registered as an intern during the concurrent period, at the end of each semester, you are obligated to send to the state board a copy of your transcript showing how many classes you took. And you have to have, and I forget, I think it's at least 8 credits per semester. And that does not include remedial courses. Like when I first started college, I had to take like 2 remedial math classes. Man, I still stink with math. Now I found this guy, David Hively, and he was the best math teacher ever. I had him for 4 classes. I followed him around the way that people follow around the Grateful Dead. I found out the guy wasn't married. I tried to set him up with my mom. I was like, dude, just come to New Jersey. I like my mom's, I think she's pretty. I don't know. I'll hook you. They're around the same age. Anyway, I really like that guy. But anyway, if you have a remedial course during this time, a remedial math or remedial English or whatever, that would not count towards the 8 minimum. Now, I point this out for a couple of reasons. This may not have impacted some of you. You might have already had the 60 credits. You might have already had a bachelor's or whatever when you got in, or maybe just had accumulated 60 credits before starting it. So it wouldn't apply to you. And if you did get the initial 60 credits while you were working at a funeral home and registered as an intern, the state has not been as thorough in enforcing this in the past 10 years, I'd say. It used to be they were very strict about it. You had to send that transcript every semester. That started waning a little bit, and then 2020 hit, and they really stopped requiring it, not in paper, not on print, but they just stopped enforcing it for a while. And I believe they started to enforce it again. But like I said, you got to make that distinction in your mind that concurrent, if they're talking about a concurrent internship, they're talking about amassing that initial 60 credits, which you're allowed to do while you're working at a funeral home and gaining your 75 funerals, 75 embalmings, 25 sets of funeral arrangements, right? You're allowed to do all of that at the same time. If you were doing mortuary school, and like myself, I already had a bachelor's. I had a bachelor's and a master's when I started mortuary school. I went through all of that, and then I was like, let me go back to community college. Whatever, right? And anyway, yeah, and so I never had a quote unquote concurrent internship, but I did do my internship concurrently with schooling. So you can see where it gets confusing, and I have not poked or prodded any students or grads who have taken the test to see how heavily this is represented on the test. I don't want to go down that path. That's just something I wouldn't want to do. But yeah, something that yeah you definitely need to know. So again, the time 2 years by default. They'll extend it a third year without question. Right? They will give you a third year without question, but by default, when they issue it, it's just 2 years. And then if you need the third year, fine, they'll give it to you. The amount of cases, and again, remember the 25, or I'm sorry, 25 sets of arrangements, 75 funerals, 75 embalmings. Background, we'll get into that a little bit on a later slide. That's more about disclosing if you have any criminal irregularities in your background, I'll say, okay? Yeah, all of those have to be disclosed, and I'll talk about that later on. Internship extension. Now, interns often extend their internship past the 3 years, but you have to request it and you have to give them a valid reason to extend it. And I see students have it extended, like I'm having issues on the national, can I get an additional 3 months? And they will normally comply. They'll normally give you an extra 3 months or an extra 6 months. That is not codified, though. That's just the state board going, all right, we'll give you a couple extra months. That's not in print. That's not something they have to do at any time. I mean, on print, you get 3 years, and in 3 years, if you're not done, you got to end you have to terminate the internship. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't just terminate the internship and then just get done whatever it is you need to get done, the national, the jurisprudence, whatever it is, right? And then re-sign on as an intern and complete the process. But on paper, that's essentially what they would expect you to do. If you fail the state board practical, and I haven't heard of anybody failing it in years. I'm not saying phone the thing in. I'm just saying, if you've done the 75 embalmings, that should be straightforward. I think it's the most stressful to test, but probably is the easiest. If you fail it, you have to wait, 30 days, and then you can reschedule it. So if you fail it, you got to wait. Oh, and you have to pay them again. I think it's, I want to say it's $150, but I'm intentionally leaving that off. The cost of things often is asked. How much does it cost to register as a funeral home? How much does it, excuse me, how much does it cost to register as a funeral director, to renew your license? How much is it to register for a COR, the certificate of registration for a funeral home? How much is it to renew that? All of that is in the regulation. And like I said, they have been prone to ask questions about that, which seems silly to me, but whatever. I don't write the test. So, again, new for interns and preceptors. Again, this really isn't new as it's been 6 years. In 2019, preceptors cannot be convicted of a crime in the past 5 years. However, it has to be a crime related to either funeral service or moral turpitude, meaning if you ripped off a bunch of pre-need money, I know this. I know a funeral director that did this years ago before they tightened up the laws. And he's a real nice guy, and he was actually our competitor going up. Nice person though. I mean, we always had a great relationship with him. Super nice fellow, and he had a gambling problem. Addiction hits people in weird ways, man. And he ended up taking a bunch of his pre-need money and I think pissing it away in Atlantic City and getting arrested for it. And this was 35 years ago, I'd say, somewhere in there, and so yeah, if that was the case, if somebody got arrested for, something having to do with funeral service, yeah, no, they're going to say, no, you got to wait this one out. If it's been more than 5 years, they don't care. Now, a crime of moral turpitude is a different thing altogether. If somebody has been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, that tends to be like murder, rape, things like that. Chances are they're probably not going to be your preceptor anyhow, because if it's been in the last 5 years, I would assume they would be in prison. If you rape somebody or murder somebody, I would assume you're not going to, get your life back within 5 years, but they still codified it for whatever reason. The preceptor cannot have revocation, suspension, or surrender of a license from any professional board, meaning that the state issues licenses for accountants, for barbers and hairdressers, for almost everything, right? So let's say you are a funeral director, but you're also an accountant, and you get into trouble with the Board of Accounting, which is, I believe, the Board of Banking and Accounting, if I'm not mistaken. I could absolutely be wrong on that. Or something with insurance or something like that. Well, no, you still can't be somebody's preceptor for at least 5 years, which I think is a reasonable stance for the state to take. And if your license had been revoked or suspended in that last 5 years, again, it's just the state playing it safe, going, I don't know, maybe this person plays things a little fast and loose. You know, let's let them cool their jets for a bit before we let them take on an intern. Oh, this is no one. This probably impacted Mosi. The intern application is now available on the website. It used to be the preceptor had to request it in writing. It was something that it had to come on funeral home letterhead, and they wouldn't mail the application out to anybody. And from what my understanding is, somewhere in like the 1970s, maybe even earlier than that, somebody in the state registered themselves with the state board claiming they worked at a funeral home, but they didn't work at that funeral home. So to put the kibosh on it, they said, no, 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 we just can't be giving these applications out to anybody. Now they make it available on their website. You do have to log in to get it, but anybody can get a user login. You just create a new member, pop, 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 and then you're in. You can get the application and fill it out, have the funeral director fill out a portion you mailed in. It was a pain years ago, man. You had to send the letter off, wait for them to get it, wait for them to read it in. Then okay, then they'll mail you the application. Then you had to mail that back. Then you had to wait for that to process. It was a pain. Now, other changes they made back in 2019, licensees are now required to notify the mortuary board in writing within 30 days upon conviction of any crime. And this includes arrests, summons, indictments, admissions into pretrial intervention, a guilty plea to any violation of law, ordinance, a felony, a DUI, a misdemeanor, or disorderly offense in New Jersey or any other jurisdiction, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. No, it doesn't. Norm Macdonald has a great bit about that. He's like, if you go there and murder somebody, they will come and get you. They'll bring you back and you will be tried by a jury of your peers. He's like, what they really mean by that saying is you can go to Las Vegas and spend time with a prostitute and they won't tell your wife. And he was right. I think that's what that whole ad campaign really was. But in any sense, if you are arrested or convicted of anything, you have to notify the state within 30 days of that. And it used to be it was only when you went to renew your license. And oh, that was great back in the day when the form would come out. They would list all of the disclosures, everybody that disclosed what had happened over the past 2 years. And like, ooh, so and so got a DUI. Ooh, so and so was arrested for that. It was all petty stuff. It was nobody was arrested for murder or anything, thank God. But it was just funny to read them. Now it's just spread out through. Since you have to notify them right away. But again, if you have anything in your criminal background, it's best to just disclose it. Because if you don't tell them and they find out later, they're going to come at you hard, man. Because that's fraud by omission. So yeah, not a good thing. Now, tickets, speeding tickets, they don't care about that. If you get a speeding ticket, a parking ticket, who cares? A disorderly offense is, I mean, let's say you go to an Eagles game or if you're a Giants fan, you go to a Giants fan or Jets. If you're a Jets fan, I am sorry. My apologies to you. But anyway, you go and let's say you go to one of these games and I don't know, you get liquored up and get arrested for disorderly conduct or something. Yeah, you would have to disclose that. And that's a misdemeanor. It's a minor misdemeanor. You still got to tell the state. They just don't care about speeding tickets or parking tickets. Again, 2019 changes. The state board clarified intern responsibilities, participating in funeral arrangements, preservation, washing, or disposal of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner of mortuary science, meaning not just your preceptor, any funeral director is working there, you can make arrangements on their behalf. Um, so again, it's the idea that you would meet with the family, and before the statement of funeral goods and services was actually ratified, the preceptor or the funeral director in charge would take a look over it to make sure everything was correct and good, and then you'd be on your way. Preceptor is responsible for reviewing and executing the statement of funeral goods and services with the intern before providing it to the consumer for review. Now, that second line is a bit misleading because the way that they wrote this, participating in funeral arrangements, preservation, washing, disposal of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner, means that any licensed practitioner can approve it. Now, realistically, it should be your preceptor, but the way they wrote the law is, all right, your preceptor's on vacation. They're down in Florida and there's another funeral director there. Fine, you can still do that and they can ratify it. Or if, I know my preceptor when I was an intern, it was Jimmy Doyle, and he had already sold the business to SCI. He was on what they call half pay, meaning he only had to work half the time. And I think they were paying him like a um, do not compete on top of it, whatever. He was around once every 4 months, maybe, so obviously everything was signed off on by the other director. Well, he basically, I'm not saying this out loud, but maybe the signature was forged here or there, but I wouldn't know because it wasn't my signature. Um, but now they've said it's all right to do that. That's fine. It's not a problem. If it's somebody else, fine, you can make arrangements on their behalf and things like that. Interns and advertisements and or business cards. They specified this. This was just left open-ended before. If an intern in an ad or a website or social, and remember, social media is considered an advertisement. So all of the laws regarding advertisement do extend to social media and or business cards. So to be listed as, John Doe, NJ intern registration number 1234. Now, what that is also missing is the statement that you are not licensed and basically I'm not worthy, not licensed, not allowed to make funeral arrangements, embalm, or direct services. However, as an intern, you're just doing it under somebody's supervision, but you still have to have the disclosure listed, which does get a little bit wonky and a little bit confusing. All right, forms of ownership, right? What are the different forms of ownership? The corporate versus a proprietorship versus, let's say, a partnership, and even like the concept of an LLC, which you're allowed to do even if you're a proprietor. It makes sense. Frankly, if I owned a business, man, I would never have it as anything other than an LLC, but that's me. Um, you have to know the use of the manager name and titles on the sign, right? Now, the manager, and this comes up later on, you can either use manager, senior director, executive director. Um, I don't think supervisor. I think it's executive director, senior director, or manager. And you have to pick one and stick with it. You can't just keep changing it. And if you wanted to just have senior director, fine, that's fine. But you can't have it as senior director one place, and then on your cards it says manager. You pick one and you stick with it across the board. It has to be on the sign or somewhere near the entrance. It doesn't have to be on both. If it's on the sign, that's fine. If it's at the entrance, that's fine. It has to be one or the other somewhere close to the entrance, and that's perfectly fine. Like at the school, we are actually a funeral home according to the state of New Jersey because of the anatomical donor program. Our sign is the big sign that says Mercer County Community College. We can't go sticking a manager sign up underneath of that, so we just put one in the lap, and it's fine. Great, satisfies everything. Now, death of an owner. Okay, what happens when there's a death of an owner? How long do you have to notify the state and notify them of who is going to be managing the funeral home? I intentionally leave that out because I can never remember it off the top of my head. It's longer than I always think. I want to say it's 30 days, but it might be 10. It might be 15 actually. I can't remember off the top of my head. I always leave that blank for that reason. I want you folks to go back and look it up. Um, a new installation. Remember, a new installation is anytime there is a change of ownership of a funeral home, right? Now, that includes if you buy Brand X Funeral Home, right? That's a new installation. According to the state of New Jersey, that is a brand new funeral home, even if it's been in business since the 1800s. And you buy it, and even if you keep the name, it's Brand X Funeral Home. People are used to Brand X. Great. You can keep the name, it's fine. State still looks at it as a new installation. Now, let's say Brand X Funeral Home is on one corner and they like it, it works for them, but that building across the street would be perfect. And that building then comes up for sale. Great, we'll move the funeral home over there. It's fine to do, but it is a new installation. I don't care if that funeral home's existed for 100 years and it's going to keep the same name, same owner, everything. It doesn't matter. It's a new building. It is a new installation. According to the state of New Jersey, that's a brand new business. It's weird because this is a weird legal gray area. I think this would fold in court if it was ever challenged because they say, oh, it's new, but you have to have 7 years of records that we can look through. So I don't know. I could see that getting, I don't know. I could see that folding under heavy questioning, let's say. Again, closing a funeral home, what do you need to do? How soon do you need to notify the state board? And what needs to be done at the funeral home? And specifically things like disconnecting the phone, terminating the phone number, showing the board evidence of that, showing the board evidence that you have discontinued the EDRS number or the EDRS account rather, showing them that they, or at least making sure that the sign is covered. And what's funny is the state board only goes after funeral homes on this. They don't go after like if, all right, so okay, I'm going back years here. In 2011, we bought a funeral home that was closed, and it had been closed for about 5 years. What had happened was the owner he got very sick. He went into a nursing home and he signed everything over to the nursing home. He had a son, but the son, I think, had some issues or whatever. So he signed everything over to the nursing home. The nursing home didn't know what to do with the funeral home. So they just shut it down. They didn't do anything they were supposed to, though. They never covered the sign or anything like that. The state never went after them. The state did not care. We bought the funeral home. We bought it for a song. But the day we bought it, the first thing we did was we double timed it over to that funeral home and covered that sign up because we would have been in violation. We were not open yet. There was work that needed to be done in the building, and the state would have come after us in a second, but they wouldn't have gone after a nursing home for owning it. I don't know, go figure. But you need to know time frames. How long do you have? Notify the state. And it has to be done before you close the funeral home. How much sooner does it need to be done? Yeah. Unlicensed owners, is it allowed? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can be an unlicensed owner and have somebody manage it for you. Nothing wrong with that. Now, here's the one kicker on that. If you are a proprietorship, you cannot be, well, you cannot be a sole proprietor if the owner is not licensed. Right. So you would have to change the structure of the business if the owner is not licensed to like an LLC or something like that. If it is a proprietorship under the name of the owner. So if it was me and I owned a place and it was Daily Funeral Home, right? That's fine. If I own it and I own it solely and it is a proprietorship, I don't have a business ID, a federal tax ID. I just use my social security number. That's perfectly fine, but I have to be licensed to be able to do that. When I was a kid, I grew up in a building called Daily Funeral Home. It was a proprietorship. It was under my father's name. He was the owner, the manager. He was licensed. He shuffled off this mortal coil in 1985, and my mom was not licensed yet. I don't know what she was thinking. Like, oh yeah, maybe no, he was terminally ill. She should get whatever. It doesn't matter. Well, criticizing my mom for something that happened 40 years ago. Anyway, okay, so if we look at that particular example, they bought that funeral home in 1977, right? So from 1977 to 1985, it's perfectly fine being a proprietorship under my father's name because it was Daily Funeral Home. His name was Tom Daly. If the name of the funeral home was different, if he just called it Brand X Funeral Home, he could not do that. He dies. My mom takes over. She's the owner. She had my uncle managing it. He was licensed. That was fine. It could not be a proprietorship for those 3 years when she was getting licensed. In 1988, she secured her license. At that point, she could have taken it and made it back into a proprietorship. Perfectly fine, perfectly legal. But you have to be a licensed owner to do that. And the name of the funeral home has to be in your name. Make sense? And again, there's not a lot of practical application to a lot of this. It's just crap that you have to know to get through the test. And then once you're through it, you can just let it fall into the recesses of your mind, along with like the anatomical guides and limits and stuff like that that you'll probably never use again. All right, pre-need. Pre-need is a big thing. You'll definitely see questions on pre-need. The structure of those questions, I can only wager a guess at. Okay, licensees. You have to be licensed to sell pre-need. And there are people that sell pre-need exclusively. A friend of mine does that. I worked with him for years. And he loves it. He's like, yeah, he's like, I just sell pre-need and I don't have to make 3 a.m. house calls and I schedule it. I take time off when I want. I'm like, oh, that's great. Anyhow, back to this. So, pre-need, you have to be licensed and the signatures on forms, right? You need to have a funeral director's signature on the statement of funeral goods and services for pre-need. And if it is prepaid, you have to have something explaining where those funds are going. And this is all done for you if you work with one of the major pre-need companies. Like if your funeral home has an account with Choices, the Choices paperwork has all of this already in it. You pull a folder out, has an explanation. Here's where everything is going. And you need to have somebody sign off on that. Number one, showing that they understand it. Number two, you need to have a signature for tax purposes because anything held in a trust can be taxed. And who is going to be taxed on that? Is it the funeral recipient? Is it the informant? Where are these taxes going? So again, all of that is relatively important. Trust accounts. You're allowed to have a trust account. If you want it to just go down to a local bank and open up a trust and have everybody put their pre-need in there, absolutely allowed to do that. It just has to be managed correctly. It can't be accessible to you in any way without the death happening. Again, oh, it's been a slow month. Oh, let's pull some pre-need funds. No, 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 absolutely not. Absolutely not. And if you sit with a family making arrangements for 9.5 hours and they prepay, and the next day they call and they go, well, we want to switch funeral homes. You don't get squat. Can't keep anything. You cannot keep a penny. It doesn't matter if you worked with them for 8.5 hours. You get a big fat goose egg on that one. It's a drag from our perspective, but again, remember these are designed for consumer protection, and there are states that people are not afforded these protections, and I have seen people ripped off by funeral homes, specifically in Florida. Oh, they're bad down there, man. So it's good. This is a good thing. I know there are times if you lose a call, you're like, son of a, I put so much time into this. Doesn't matter. It's all about consumer protection. And in the long run, it is a good thing. Change of funeral home. How long, if you get notified, how long do you have? Like family walks in, it says, we don't like you anymore. We want to switch to brand X. How long do you have to transfer that information, that those funds and whatnot over to brand X funeral home, right? You need to look that up. I want to say it's 14 days, but it might be 10. So double check that. Um, the pre-need ledger. Man, I just saw a funeral home get in trouble for this. I was reading through the state board minutes, and yeah, there's a funeral home, and I know the funeral home. They got in trouble for not having a proper pre-need ledger, and then they came back to inspect it later on. They still hadn't corrected everything. That's bad news, man. The state is very specific about what you need in your pre-need ledger, and you need to have and these are things that you need to know. What needs to be in that pre-need ledger? The date that it was opened, the amount of money that went into it, who opened it, who was the funeral for, how much has it accrued since it went in, things along that line. So yeah, all of that needs to be in there. Um, the date the arrangements were made and the date that it was open, so that they can make sure that you send in the money in a right amount in the correct amount of time. If somebody comes in and cuts you a check for $14,000 to go into a pre-need fund, you can't leave it sitting around for 6 months. No, no, it's got to go in right away. What's the time frame? And I want to say it's 30 days, but here again, I'm leaving that one. I don't have my notes, so I'm guessing at it. Cancellation fee? Nope, not a penny. You do not get a penny, man. And it's a drag. And I remember we bought a funeral home in '07. And when you buy a funeral home, you're new to the area, you are going to lose a certain percentage of work to your competitors. It's just the way of things. Oh, I don't know these people. I'm going to go across the street to that. That's fine. It is what it is, right? And it would kill me because we were dealing with choices. So I wouldn't even get a chance to deal with the family. I would just get a letter from Choices saying we lost the call to whatever funeral home, and I'd get so mad anytime I saw a letter from Choices. I was like, I know what this is. Damn it! Yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, it's just part of the fun of owning a funeral home, I guess. So 100% pre-need trust. 100% of what is given to you has to go into the trust. You can't keep a percentage of it. Again, going down to Florida, we had a case out of there years ago where they had made prearrangements since 1991 for a direct cremation, which was a total in that time of maybe $1,100. And in 2011, the person had moved to New Jersey and we were trying to get the funds. And they're like, no, we'll only give you the original amount back. We keep all the interest. I'm like, are you insane? They're like, well, we needed to store everything. We needed to store like the casket and all. I'm like, okay, number one, you didn't store a casket as a direct cremation. Even if it was a burial, you would not have stored a casket for 10 years. You're talking about another funeral home. Stop lying to me. And the guy's like, oh, all right. Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm like, dude, seriously? But anyway, that's the way it works in different states. So this is set up for consumer protection, and it does make sense in the long run in that, we're nowhere if we don't have that level of trust with families. Now, trust issues. If you have a trust account that you open up on your own, perfectly legal to do so, right? When you hit 200 accounts, right, you've got 200 funerals in there, then you are allowed to take 1% of the interest to fund that trust account, meaning that there's enough paperwork going out and enough to keep track of. You're going to have to pay somebody to look over this to make sure that everything is properly held and properly distributed and everybody gets the paperwork that they need and all the funeral homes get their monthly statements and families get their annual statements and everything else. You're going to need somebody to do that. So they allow you to take 1% of the interest to then pay for that person. So if you look at Choices, they have like $300 million in that trust account. You can imagine the amount of interest that must generate. And right now, the interest rates are not great. Actually, they should be creeping up because the interest rates are high overall. And I have not looked at Choices in some time. But in any sense, if let's say the family overall is getting 7% annually on it, they would only get 6% because the 1% would go to pay for the trust, which again is a fair deal if you ask anybody, right? Now, commissions. Commissions can be paid on newly issued insurance. As I was saying earlier, a friend of mine does exclusively pre-need, and that's what he does. He sells insurance. You have to disclose to the family that a commission is being taken, but you don't have to tell them how much. You just have to, disclose, yes, I am getting a commission on this, but you don't have to tell them how much. Now, this is, excuse me, solely on newly issued insurance, meaning as a licensee, you also have an insurance license and you're able to write this up. If somebody comes into the funeral home and they already have a life insurance policy and they're just going to change the ownership structure so they can go on to Medicaid, let's say, and this doesn't count as an asset, you cannot take a commission on that. And that's a royal pain in the rear set up. If anybody's ever set this up before, it's a nightmare because you had to make the state of New Jersey the absolute beneficiary and the funeral home essentially the no. I'm sorry. Yeah. You make the I'm sorry, you make the state of New Jersey the beneficiary and the funeral home the absolute assignee. Meaning that a death happens, somebody has $100,000 life insurance policy, they spend $10,000 on the funeral, 90,000 would go to the state of New Jersey. And that's fine. It's fair. It is what it is. If the state is paying for your health insurance, if you're in a nursing home or something, that's very, very expensive. So they go, look, you can't just have you can't use that as a tax shelter. And that's what people were doing prior to the law change, which was back in 2000. POD account. This would be if you went to a bank. Perfectly legal. You can send somebody down the bank and go, okay, here's how much the funeral is. And they go, okay, great. We'll open an account. Here you go. Here's how much interest you're getting on it. We will keep this account in place until the death happens. We just need a copy of the death certificate to release those funds over to the funeral home. And bear in mind, with pre-need, anything above and beyond the cost of the funeral home, above and beyond the cost of the funeral cannot be kept by the funeral home. Any excess has to go back to the family. And I kind of disagree with that because I feel this really keeps funeral homes from guaranteeing funerals. Which I worked for a funeral home over in PA that guaranteed funerals for decades. And they were investing the funds so well that they were making profit on top of it. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Family came in, they paid that amount. That's all they paid. They won't ask them for another penny. Great. The funeral home invested it wisely. Why should they not be rewarded? But New Jersey does not see it that way. If there's 37 cents left over, you got to give it back to the family. Unless it is a irrevocable, which changes things altogether, in which case it would go to the state of New Jersey, that 37 cents. Now, new again, must notify social services when any refund on an irrevocable prepaid funeral is made. Used to be $500 or more. Now it's again 37 cents are left over. Okay, you got to notify social services and see what they want to do with it. Normally if there's I don't know, 10 grand left over or something, yeah, they're going to want that money. If it's a couple dollars, they normally go, whatever, who cares? But yeah, it's their call on it. And again, I don't care if it's $1,000 or 25 cents. Doesn't matter. You got to notify them. Advertising. And remember, advertising is extended to the website as well as social media. And sometimes, like when I'm just bored or something, I'll go around and look at different funeral homes' websites. I've seen so many that are out of alignment with with the advertising rule. I've never called the state board. I wouldn't dream of doing that. Even, you know, my biggest enemy in I don't have a lot of enemies in the funeral business, but let's say I make an awful enemy and it's my mortal enemy, and I see that the advertising statute is not being met on their website, I still wouldn't call the state board on them. But anyhow, with advertising, if the funeral home is listed, it has to be the name is registered. Like I was talking about before, if you own Brand X Funeral Home, you can't just start calling it Brand X Memorial Home. And you can if you change the name thoroughly and completely with the state, but you can't just, for the hell of it, let me see if that plays. No. It is as it is. The manager has to be listed as well as a manager license number. Um, Novelty items. Now, if you have a small novelty item, a pen or see if I have any funeral home ones here. I'm looking at these pens. No, I don't have any. Anyway, but if you have a little pen, oh, here's one. Oh yeah, it's back when I used to work there. Here's one that I used to funeral home that I used to work for. You can barely see it, but anyway, if it's a small pen, a small novelty item like a pen, or my uncle used to get golf tees made. I don't golf, so I don't know a lot about it, but I understand you had to put the ball in a tee, and he would go to like the tee boxes around a country club or a golf course and just throw these tees all, or I'm sorry, yeah, I guess a tee, yeah, golf tees. He would just throw them all over the place. And that was a form of his advertising. Now, if it's that small of an item, there's no way you can get the full name of the funeral home and the address and the telephone number, and the manager's name and license. It's just too small. So if it's a small novelty item, they go, okay, the municipality and the funeral home name, all right? Brand X Funeral Home in West Windsor, New Jersey. Fine. That's perfectly fine. Now, in obits, if you have your logo in an obit, that is not considered part of the obituary and it falls under the advertising regulations. Now, if you just list in an obit, relatives and friends may call from 6 to 8 p.m. at Brand X Funeral Home, 251 Main Street in Anytown, New Jersey. That's perfectly fine. The issue is when you have a visual logo that you put in there, and I have an example of it, and I'll show it to you in just a second. But if you do that, then it falls under the advertising regulation, wherein you have to have the full name of the funeral home, the address, the telephone number, the manager name, license number, all that stuff has to be there. And the funeral home has to pay for it. You can't drop that on the family. They go, no, the state said, no, that's an ad. No, you're not making a family pay for that. You pay for it. And I'll show you an example here in a second. Now, testimonials. You can have testimonials so long as it is an actual person that used your funeral home. Like I know I live right around the corner from FC Kerbeck. It's a real big car dealership. Like they've got like everything from Kias to Lamborghinis there. I mean, it's wild, yeah. Anyway, it's right at the base of the Tacony Palmyra Bridge. And I've seen so many billboards for them over the years with different members of the Phillies. Like when Cliff Lee was a Philly, he was in a bunch of their ads. Who knows whether I actually bought a car from them or not? Now let's say I went out and got, I don't know, Jalen Hurts or um, I can't think of the Giants quarterback's name. I know his last name is Dart. I don't know his first name. Let's say we get Mr. Dart in an ad. That's fine if he used the funeral home. If he just hasn't, he's just a celebrity that you're just paying a bunch of money for. No, it doesn't work. He or she has to have used the funeral home in order to use their testimonial. Now, price reductions. Oh, this is a bear. Let me get into this real quick because okay, you can you cannot advertise something as a reduced price unless that price has remained the same for at least 30 days prior. Okay, so here's what they're saying. Let me get back to my whiteboard. I don't need to add a sticky note. I don't need any of that stuff. Just give me an eraser. There we go. No, that didn't work. Oh, I guess that doesn't work. Whatever. All right. So I was all right. How can I just clear this thing? I don't know. Anyway, so here's the idea. You've got a casket and it's $300, right? $300, right? So you go, okay, I sell this casket for $300. So what is today? Today's Wednesday, right? So here on Wednesday, I go, no, I'm gonna sell this casket for $600. But I'm going to advertise if you come in and make pre-arrangements in the next week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, I'll sell that to you at half price, right? I'll sell you that $600 casket at half price if you come in. I'll sell it to you for just $300. Well, no, you're really not getting a discount. It's just been artificially inflated to then get you to pay the what was the original price thinking you're getting a deal. This happens in retail all the time with shoes and dresses and suits and stuff like that, like Macy's and all that. They do this stuff all the time. Funeral homes is really not as applicable. I don't see a lot of funeral homes advertising, their prices and stuff like that. But in any sense, if you wanted to pull a scam like this, and this would be a scam, what you would need to do is basically raise it to that $600, right? And leave it for 30 days. And I'm sorry, my handwriting. Well, it's not even handwriting. And I'm saying this, and I have a pen for this. I wonder if this works. Oh, there we go. Let me see if this works. Oh, yeah, there we go. Look at that. This is what I should have done. So 30 days. For 30 days at that 600, then you're fine. You're perfectly fine then, right? That's acceptable. If you just jack it up to 600, run an ad saying, come in the next 2 weeks, and arrange or pre-arrange, and I'll sell you this at half price. No, you can't do that. But if you wait 30 days and then advertise it, yeah, you can do that. I'm not saying that's a good idea. I don't think it's a great marketing plan, but it is allowed according to the state of New Jersey. I'm sitting here this whole time with a pen that worked, and I'm an idiot. I'm just thinking of it now. Okay, there we go. Yes, that price reduction thing. Like I said, you're not going to see that a lot with any practical application, that's for sure. But like I said, for testing purposes, it's something that, yeah, you should know. Oh, there it goes. Okay, good. There is an ad in Obit, right? I pulled this out of the Courier Post. I'm not sticking it to the folks at Chinooski in any way. I've met them. They're very nice folks. I just happened to see this in an Obit, right? This is what's considered an ad and obit. You see, this has this big picture here with a big dove and whatnot. And I remember one that I saw that had like a big lighthouse on it, and it said, oh, and there was a bridge next to the lighthouse. It's like your bridge over troubled water and all troubled waters and all this stuff. That's all well and good, but you can't make the family pay for that in obit, you know? So if you did run something like this, and again, this is becoming rarer and rarer because print media is dying extremely quickly. You would get two bills. You would get the bill for, Mr. Jones, services are memorial donations. He's survived by his wife, whomever, blah, 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 blah. And then you would get a bill for that you could give the family, and you would get a separate bill for this area here, this whole advertisement. And that's why it has to have the street address in it, the town, and then the manager and the manager license number in it. But again, if they just ran an obit saying, calling hours are 7 to 9 on Tuesday and 9 to 10 Wednesday at Chiniski Funeral Home, you don't need to separate things. It's not considered an ad at that point. It's just if there's a visual image in there, your logo or whatever. Advertising includes, and again, you're not going to see many of these aerial displays. I've never been down the beach and seen like use Brand X Funeral Home on one of those planes that pulls the whole like eat at Joe's thing or whatever. Circulars, handbills, flyers, letters. Remember letters out to somebody. I mean, a direct letter with an advertisement. I don't mean a correspondence with somebody over a particular topic, but if you are talking about, anything trying to elicit business, you need to have everything in there. Realistically, all of this should be on your letterhead anyhow. And any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public or to a specific group. And like I said, in 2019, they rightfully so extended all advertising regulations to the funeral home website and to social media. It just makes sense. I mean, I see lots of funeral homes that are very active on Facebook, and I have not ventured into the world of TikTok yet. So I don't know if anybody's on there. I don't know a lot about Instagram either. Maybe there's funeral homes on Instagram. I don't know. I really don't even know how Instagram works. So I don't know. But if you are, then you had to put everything in there that you would put into a normal ad. Now the fines, these are maximums, right? These are absolute maximums. If you really screw up, man, they can fine you up to $10,000 for an offense. Now, if you screw up and you do the same thing again, they can fine you up to $20,000. Yeah, it's kind of rare, but it has happened. I've seen this happen with a couple I can think of one in particular that gets fined on a regular basis. And damn, if the owner wasn't the nicest guy on the planet, just he cut a lot of corners. And he had people doing stuff that he shouldn't have and got caught. But in the long run, he was paying people a lot less than I guess he would a director. I don't know. But in any sense, that's maximums. That's the absolute ceiling. Now, interment, you need to know the depth of burial. Burial is anybody buried needs to have at least 4 feet of earth on top of them, unless they're in a properly constructed sealed burial vault. So if you've got a burial vault, there's no amount that's needed. You can have the burial vault right at the top of the earth. It doesn't matter. But if you're just burying a casket, it has to be 4 feet under. And the way that I always remember that's the top of the casket, right? If you think of the bottom of the casket, casket's roughly 2 feet tall, maybe a little bit more, but roughly. If you think of the bottom of that's 6 feet under. That's how I remember it. With kids, it drops down to, and double check me on this. It's either 3 feet 6 inches or 3 feet 9 inches. I want to say 3 feet 6, but here again, you want to double check that. Like I said, I leave that information out on purpose, so you have to go look it up. It's either 3.6 or I think it's 3.6, but it might be 3 feet 4 inches. So double check that. I think it's 3.6. But anyway, multiple burials, right? If you bury somebody, multiple people in a casket, you are allowed to do that. The only thing that changes is the order of who is allowed to approve it. It's the normal line of next of kin, spouse, adult children, etc. But they add to that the decedent. And they do this, and I think the idea behind this legislation is if a mother is giving birth to a child, and the child is born and dies, and mother knows that she's dying, right? Which before this century was, or before the last century, was very common. And she's dying, and she goes, "Oh, the baby's died. I'm dying. I'm not going to make it through. Like, make sure that we're buried together." That's the decedent giving permission for her to be buried with her child. Now, this is extended. Adults can be buried in the same casket. I had a student tell me about this. I've never seen this, but a student told me about this. He actually sent me a picture of it, which I've never shown to anybody because it's not mine to show. I was just curious about the logistics of it. He had a case where a young couple was murdered. It was really sad. They had just bought a new house and they were working on it. They were like 27, 28, newly married. They're in there painting the place, and somebody broke in and murdered the both of them and stole their car, and then ended up, whoever this person was, overdosed, and they found him dead in their car like the next day. So it's just tragic all around. But this couple was buried in the same casket. They came in, both families. It was the parents of both of them. They asked if they could, and they said, yeah, sure. So they bought a very large casket and had both of them buried in there. Perfectly acceptable. Now, multiple burials, right? If you're talking about double death burials, it's normally not an issue unless you go to disinter. If you disinter somebody, well, remember, any disinterment, I should probably have these in a separate order. But if you disinter anybody, it takes the consent of the spouse and all adult children, which is weird. Right? It's strange the law is written like that because the spouse gets to make all decisions before the person's buried. As soon as they're buried, in essence, they could be outvoted by the children if they so desired. But you would need to have the spouse and all adult children sign off on this, and if not, a reason for it. And if one of the children is opposed to it or the spouse is opposed to it, well, it may end up having to go to a court or something like that to figure out what they're doing. Now, that being said, uh, let me go back to my whiteboard here. Let's continue. All right, yes, just the love of Pete just open. No, I don't need to know about sticky notes. All right, so let's say we've got, you know, let's say we've got three graves, and there are triple depth graves. I not commonly, but I did see one over at Holy Cross over in Yaden, and it was triple death. This was the first one going in, and it was scary looking down because it was roughly 21 feet down if you think about it, yeah, or about 18, 19 feet, but with the digging and all, it's normally closer to 20. It was deep, man. It was far enough that if somebody had fallen, they could have absolutely been killed. And yeah, let's say you want to disinter number one, you have to get permission from everybody in grave number three and grave number two to get to grave number one. You can't just take them out, remove number one, and then move on with it. And if you remember, you may or may not, a disinterment permit has 7 signatures on it, right? The owner of the grave, the next of kin, the cemetery where it's leaving, cemetery where it's going, the funeral director, the registrar where it is going, or I'm sorry, from where it's coming. So you need that for all of them because you're in essence, if you're going to do this, you are going to disinter 3 people to get down to number one. And you need the permission to do so. Even if they're just pulling them out to put them right back in, you need to get the permission of all of them. Again, not something you'll see a lot in practice, but they love to throw those little hypotheticals in there. All right, stick with me here. We should be wrapping up here pretty soon. All right, the crematory, right? You need the presence of a license and the record keeping. Now, this is in the regs, and I have a whole list sitting on my computer of what records they have to keep. Again, I can give you some of them. You need to look them up. The crematory has to record things like the name of the deceased, the date of death, the date of cremation, the name of the funeral home, the family's information, the disposition of cremated remains. In that, did they give them back to the funeral home? Fine, that's the disposition as far as the crematory is concerned. Was the crematory paid to take them and scatter them? Okay, then they need to keep track of that, right? What did they do with these cremated remains? So yeah, there's more to it than that, but look it up, and like I said, it's easy enough to find in the regs. I don't know why I'm fading out here. I don't know. I feel like I need to set up a green screen, but yeah, and again, remember crematory point to disposition. You do need a licensee there. Unclaimed cremated remains. After 1 year, you can dispose of them. Most funeral homes don't, but you have to do your due diligence in contacting the family. And the basic agreed upon way to do this is to send certified letters saying, and they normally say to send two, saying, like, look, we have these cremated remains and we're going to give you till this date. If you do not come to get them, we will dispose of them. And you have to dispose of them respectfully. You can't just take them and go, oh, well, your family didn't like it, so I'll just throw you in the trash. No, no, no. You can't do that. You can scatter them if you want. I think that would be a bad idea legally, but you can have them scattered. You can have them scattered at sea. You can have them buried. It's a bunch of things that you can do. Most funeral homes, when they do this, they tend to bury them, normally in a vault or something like that, in case somebody shows up in like 10 years and wants them back. Because you never know, man. People are weird. All right, statement of funeral goods and services. And again, this is minutia stuff, right? This is really, I include this just because it was new. Who knows if they're going to write questions about it. Statement at the top. This statement is subject to change by agreement of both parties, meaning you can take a statement of funeral goods and services and let's say they made some changes to it. Oh, okay. Well, I'll just, instead of writing up a new one, I'll cross this out here and, let's both initial it, showing that we are both in agreement. That's fine. I tend to be of the school of, okay, if we're going to make changes, let's just tear this one up and make a new one. I know that I had a family complain about me once because they were like, wow, it took forever to write the statement of funeral goods. Then we made some changes. It took forever to write the other one. I'm like, yeah, that's fair enough, but I'm trying to write legibly, which takes me some time. So work with me here, folks. They really didn't complain about me. They complained to me and whatever. It was what we had a laugh about it in the long run. But I am from that school of logic that is best to just tear it up and start fresh. Legally, you're not required to. They changed the boxes for sex, right? It used to be male or female. Sex and gender has gotten a lot more complicated in the last decade or so. So they just go, okay, sex, and just leave it open. Open it, you write it in. It's fine. Somebody non-binary or something. Okay, fine. Write that down. It's fine. Sanitary care without embalming was changed to other prep of the body, use of facilities and staff reviewing, to visitation. Added use of equipment and staff or graveside to the line, including accompaniment of remains to place of final disposition. So yeah, they changed some of this. This is minutia, really. I include it just because they made a big to do that they changed this. So I don't know if they're going to write questions about it or not. Um, The statement of funeral goods and services continued, receiving and forwarding remains. They are on different lines. It used to just be one line. They give them separate lines. Optional package service section. If an optional, here was the thing. This is what set off the question that I started with of, with the direct cremation. This is what set it off. Optional package service section. If an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. 2, if you select an optional package, see general price for a list of included services. And that's what everybody said. Well, can I just write up a direct cremation with a memorial service? No, you're still not allowed to. The FTC says you're not allowed to. New Jersey can make their tweaks to it. And actually, New Jersey's so strict, we could opt out of the FTC rule, but they've opted not to do that. But in any sense, yeah, you're still not allowed to do a memorial service on a direct cremation case. I mean, you can basically discount it down if you would like to match that cost, but everything has to be disclosed to the family. Like, here's what our basic service fee is, here's what the transportation fee is. If anything, it's a lot more writing, but if you are going to discount it that much, it's nice to show them how much you're discounting, I guess. Other word changing, church or clergy, change to officiant, place of worship, newspaper notice to obituary charges, pallbearers removed. You can still use pallbearers, you just have to write it in. Price reduction removed, but it can be written above grand total. So they took that out so people wouldn't look at it and just go, wait, why is there a price reduction line here and I'm not getting it? So they're not even thinking about it. But if you write price reduction on there, oh, okay, now they know that they're getting it. That used to be pre-printed in there, and most families didn't care, but it did often lead to a question of, wait, why is there oh, well, if you got a package, we would have to discount it down, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Miscellaneous. Where do you file a death certificate? Right? Remember, three municipalities in which you can do it: municipality of death, municipality of the funeral home, the municipality of disposition. Any three of those can accept a permit. The state of New Jersey cannot accept a death certificate. They can process death certificates, like they can make you copies, but it has to be accepted at a local level first, right? Here's the idea behind that. I had a case maybe 10 years ago, I'll say, 15, whatever, wherein the hospice nurse put on there that it was in Delran Township when it was actually in Riverside Township. And I didn't notice this. And I like the person's address when I wrote it down was Riverside, but I never took the time to look at the medical side of it. The registrar did, and she was like, no, 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 this is on the other side of the street. It was on this side of Creek Road or whatever. If it was on the other side, it would have been Delran. Now she noticed that and kicked it back to me, and we got the changes made so everything was accurate in it. If I had sent that to the state of New Jersey, they wouldn't have known that detail. They wouldn't be that familiar with this area. So that's why they make you have it. That's why they make you file it and have the death certificate accepted at a local level, although you may be getting the certified copies from the state, because the state tends to be the least expensive. The cost of the permit is $5. Now, if they ask about the history of that, it used to be $15 for a short period of time when they built the EDRS system. I remember saying they're never going to drop it back down to $5. It's never going to happen. And damn if they didn't. It was $15, and then they got the EDRS system up and going. They dropped it down to 5 again. It's the only time I've ever seen the state of New Jersey do that. So hats off to them on that one. Now, renting a funeral home to another. This is often done illegally. And it's done because most times most times funeral directors do not realize that there is a protocol here. So the idea is you can't, a funeral director cannot just rent another funeral home. It has to be one funeral home renting another funeral home. So it has to be approved by the owner or the manager of the funeral home on both sides. And the way that what they're doing with that is you can't just list yourself as a licensee. Like, yeah, if you have a death in the family, here's my cell phone number. Just call me. I'll try and rent a funeral home in the area. Well, no, you can't do that. If you are going to do business with a family, you have to have paperwork that says specifically where you are doing business. It has to have a physical address attached to that. You have to have a general price list, a casket price list, an outer burial container price list. You can't just be Joe Schmo from Idaho. Call me when you have a death. No, no, no. It has to be a specific funeral home. So that's why the rental of a funeral home falls under the same category. And to do this, and it's always done illegally, I'm guilty of this myself on multiple occasions. We would have a dad go, oh, call up, go, hey, yeah, my aunt died. Yeah, oh yeah, if you don't mind, we'll use your place, whatever. Fine. No, we did it illegally. What you were supposed to do is send a letter to the state board and explain to them, I want to rent this funeral home. I'm doing it because my aunt died. She lived in that area and whatever, right? And they and both funeral homes have to agree to it, and the state board always agrees to say, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. Now, if you are going to use a private residence for a funeral home for it to have a funeral, you are allowed to do so. Like a family can say, well, I want to bring mom back home and have the services here. Fine, absolutely allowed to do that. You can only do that 3 times a year, though, out of the same location. The reason being, if you did it more than 3 times, you'd have to get special permission from the state board. Maybe the family had more than 3 deaths in a year. If so, you'd write the state board and they go, oh, that's terrible. Yeah, go ahead. That's fine. If it's a matter of you're just using that house for viewings because it's nicer than your funeral home, no, they're not going to approve that. You would have to turn that building into a funeral home, right? That's what they're getting at here. right? So again, renting a funeral home to another, you can't just be a funeral director renting it. It has to be one funeral home renting another funeral home. It has to come from the owner or the manager, and you have to request a special use permit from the state. And they limit the amount of times a year you can do it unless you need it for a special reason. Like let's say you had a fire at the funeral home and your competitor goes, "Look, that sucks. That's terrible. You can use my place while you're rebuilding." You would request it from the state board, and they would say, "Yeah, sure, that's fine." You would just need to request it though. Now, okay, these next two. This is again stuff you're not going to deal with in any practical sense. A receiving vault. Now, I didn't even know what a receiving vault was when I first saw this. I had to call up Mr. Smith, Rob Smith, who ran the program at Mercer for many years. And I was like, "What the hell is a receiving vault?" He was like, "Oh yeah, receiving vaults." He was like, "Yeah, what it is years ago, if it was February and they couldn't dig into the ground, cemeteries would use receiving vaults, and it was an area they could store bodies, casketed bodies, until they were ready to be buried. Fine. Very rare in this area. I asked my boss, or my boss, my predecessor, if he had ever seen one. He said, "Yeah, I saw one in like 1971, maybe." It was a long time ago. Anyway, yeah. So, if a cemetery has a receiving vault, they can store unembalmed remains there only for 48 hours, unless the receiving vault is designed to prevent the escape of noxious smells and fumes if it seals somehow, or if it is 5 feet or more underground, which is weird, right? But if you built some huge underground garage almost where you kept all of the remains while it was February and you waited until March or April, that would be fine. If you built a building that was sealed so it didn't allow the escape of noxious fumes, again, fine. Are you ever going to see any of this in real life? No, but you may get tested on it. Now, okay, 1336 5.6A26. This is one of the dumbest things the state has ever done. Okay, so what happened was a family goes into a funeral and I don't even know if it was an immediate family member or just somebody on the funeral. The body was in plastics. I don't know, autopsy, long bone donor, maybe in a car. I don't know. And to keep the plastics down, they put duct tape around them, right? And somebody looked up the sleeve of the decedent and saw the duct tape. They got very upset. So they sent a letter to the state board with a complaint. The state board should have just said, "Yeah, that's an industry standard. So what?" They didn't. Instead, they passed this regulation. Basically, this is the dumbest thing ever. They said, "Okay, every funeral home has to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape." To which everybody said, "Okay, what the hell is flesh-colored? What do you consider flesh-colored?" And they're like, "Oh, each community will decide for themselves." Oh, great. Thanks. So you have to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape in case you're sealing up plastics around a decedent. It is one of the dumbest regs I've ever seen in my life, but it is what it is. You get a clear roll of tape and you're fine. Again, what the hell is flesh-colored? It doesn't make any sense. All right, so the amounts, welfare, you need to know the amounts, and the amounts are different for an adult, for a child, and for a baby that lives, I want to say from time of birth to 2 weeks, but I could be wrong on that. And I know that the amounts have changed recently. It's 3,000 and something now. If anybody knows it, go ahead and put it in the chat. I can't remember what it is because I haven't filed for one in years. My wife and I were talking about this last night. She was telling me it's still 3,000 something, but they are saying they're going to drop back down to the 2275 or whatever it was prior to that relatively soon. They just bumped it up during the COVID period. Um, so you have to know the amounts, and the amounts change, like I said, for an adult, a child, or a newborn. So you need to know the difference between them. And again, if I'm in class talking about this, I have all the notes in front of me and I can rattle them off. I intentionally leave them out of these so that you have to look them up. My apologies, but you'll thank me after the test. The form to use. Now, here's where it gets weird. Students have told me they've seen both PA11 and WFNJ11. It's the same form. PA11, a lot of people go at Pennsylvania. No, it's Public Assistance 11. That was the form number. They switched that to Work First New Jersey 11 during the second Bush administration, the second George Bush administration. I don't know whether it was his first or second term. But in any sense, during the Bush presidency, that's when they switched it over to Work First New Jersey. Students have told me as recently as 2 years ago that they still saw PA 11 on the test, whereas others said they saw WFNJ 11. It's the same form. Where's the claim submitted? It is submitted at a county level. And to remember that, I mean, like I'm currently in Burlington County and I practiced in Burlington County for about 10 years. If I contacted Burlington County, the Medicaid office, and remember, we always say Medicaid, it's not Medicaid, it is welfare. And people get it if they are receiving welfare benefits. We soften it by saying Medicaid, and a lot of times it's handled by the quote unquote adult Medicaid office, but it is welfare, right? The claim, like I said, is submitted at a county level. Anytime I dealt with Burlington County, very easy. If I dealt with Camden County, it was a nightmare. It was like pulling teeth to get it approved because it met a lot more people in Camden are on welfare than in Burlington County. It is what it is, you know. So it's much more difficult in that county. So bear that in mind. It's done at a county level. Emergency burial permit, again, something you won't see in practice anymore, but here's what it was. You could still be tested on it because who knows? Here's the situation. If you had a extra long weekend due to a holiday and somebody needed to be buried, let's say it was a Jewish or a Muslim situation, and they need to be buried relatively quickly. Oh no, it's a long weekend. You go before a magistrate, you get in front of a judge, explain the situation, and they can issue you an emergency burial permit. In this day and age, it doesn't matter because you can just put it into EDRS and print it out and you're good to go. Now, no person in charge of a cemetery. If there's no person in charge of a cemetery, the funeral director is in charge of filing the burial permit. You have to send it to the right person. Now, I'm going to jump over communicable diseases here, and I'll come back to that. Now, reporting veterans' death. This is a rare situation that I doubt anybody will ever see, but here's the scenario they're talking about. If a death happens outside the state of New Jersey and you're going to a cemetery where there is nobody in charge, and the person that you are burying is a veteran, the responsibility then falls to the funeral director to notify the county official in charge of veteran interments that you have done a veteran burial in that cemetery. Right, so let me run through that again. The death has happened outside of the state of New Jersey. Otherwise, if it was in the state of New Jersey, the assumption is the VA office would be notified via vital records because the death certificate is filed in New Jersey. It reflects that the person is a veteran. Okay, they're notified. So the death has happened outside the state of New Jersey. So it's not going to happen through vital records because Pennsylvania is not going to contact New Jersey. If the death had happened outside of New Jersey and you went to a cemetery where there is somebody running it, it falls to that cemeterian to then notify the county of the veteran burial. The death has happened outside the state. The person is a veteran. You're going to a cemetery with nobody in charge. It therefore falls to the funeral director to notify them. And they want to know because they keep track of it and they come back. And, like, let's say on Veterans Day and Memorial Day, it's not uncommon for them to go out, put flags on the veterans' graves. So they want to know where they're buried. That makes sense. But again, it's such an odd hypothetical. I doubt anybody is going to see it anytime in your career. Now, there is a list of communicable diseases, things like plague, cholera, yellow fever, and I have a whole list, a couple pages down. You have to notify the Department of Health within 12 hours if you have a case like this. Here again, in reality, if you do, I doubt the Department of Health would have any idea what to do. I had a student tell me they had a case with plague not too long ago. And I was like, what'd you do? They're like, oh, we just double bagged and double gloved. I was like, no, who'd you notify? They're like, oh, we didn't notify anybody. I was like, oh, okay. So it is what it is, but you're supposed to notify the Department of Health within 12 hours. And I have a list on a later slide. EDRS, all right, I think by now we're all familiar with it. Burial at sea, you may need to know this. You know, the idea that you had to put 150 pounds of ballast in the casket, you need to put 20 holes in it. What is it? 8 on the bottom, 8 on the top, and then 2 at the front, 2 at the back, right? Yeah, 8, 8, 16, and 4. Yeah. You have to have 6 bands on it, 2 at the head end, 2 at the foot end, 1 going over the top, 1 going around the middle. You have to go at least 3 miles out to sea, and the water has to be at least 300, or excuse me, 600 feet deep in order for you to do that. And that burial of casketed remains. Signatures, a death certificate and disinterment permit. What signatures go on them? What goes on the statement of funeral goods and services? What goes on the FTC disclosure statement? Do you even need an FTC disclosure statement? You know what? Give me 2 seconds here. I'm going to pause for 1 second here just because. Shoot. Oh, no, wait. There we go. Oh, wait. Screen sharing is paused. I wanted to stop share. Wait a minute. Okay. All right. So signatures. What signatures go on to a death certificate? There's 3 or 4, right? The funeral director, the registrar, the pronouncer, and the certifier. The pronouncer and the certifier may be the same person, meaning you only have 3. Let's say a doctor comes in and says, "Oh, the time of death is 3:58 p.m. and the cause of death is COPD or whatever." Then yeah, okay, that's fine. You would only have 3. Let's say a nurse comes in at a hospice situation. She pronounces the time of death. You later contact the doctor. The doctor signs it and certifies it. Funeral director signs it. The registrar signs it. You would then have 4, right? So it's 3 or 4, depending on if the certifier and pronouncer are the same person or not. A disinterment permit. I went through this earlier. There's 7 signatures that are needed on that. The funeral director, the owner of the grave, the next of kin of the decedent, which may be the owner of the grave, but you never know. The cemetery that you are leaving, the cemetery to where you're going, the registrar in the locale that you are doing the disinterment. What is the 7th? Funeral director, owner, next of kin, cemetery, registrar. Shoot, I can't think of the 7th one. I'll leave that one to you folks to look up. I give you 6 or 7. You just need to figure out the 7th on that. I kind of doubt that you're going to see that question, but you never know. It's just good to know. It's good to know these things, The statement of funeral goods and services, the funeral director and the purchaser, Purchaser doesn't necessarily have to be the next of kin. Let's say family's having a hard financial time. Neighbor just won the lottery. He goes, I'll handle it for you. He comes over, signs off and everything. He goes, not a problem. I'll cut you a check, whatever. Fine. That's perfectly legal. There's no law saying who has to buy what. The FTC disclosure disclaimer, you don't need one. If you have one, it's a good idea that, oh, yes, you're confirming that you received a general price list before we talked about anything, or you confirm that you received the casket price list before I took you in the showroom or whatever. That's fine, but it's not required by law. Again, it's a good step to take. It's a nice CYA, but it's absolutely not required. UAGA, the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. This is this is recognized in New Jersey. And the idea is when somebody gives a body, this does a couple of things. This allows somebody to determine what happens to their body post-mortem. Because if you put it down that you go, okay, yeah, I absolutely want my body used for science, or I want to donate organs, that trumps everything. That's that's it. Okay, you got to do it. But this also allows, in certain situations, like at Mercer, or Robert Wood Johnson, or at any of the medical schools that take decedents, basically what families are doing is legally they're surrendering the remains over to the institution. Normally at a funeral home, you have what's called constructive custody of the decedent, meaning that, or excuse me, I'm sorry, you have actual custody of the decedent. The family retains constructive custody in that they decide tomorrow they don't want to use you. You can't keep the body. They go, no, I want to use Brand X. You have to give up the body. You have to surrender it. You can't keep it and say, no, you at least pay me first or something. No, you got to surrender it. They retain constructive control. in a situation where you're dealing with the medical school or with Mercer, they bequeath the body to them or to us, meaning that a family calls us up 2 days later and says, I had to change a heart. We can tell them, yeah, too bad, go pound sand. Now, we wouldn't, at Mercer in particular, we wouldn't. But the idea behind the legislation is if somebody is given to a medical school, like an anatomical embalming is much different than a funerary embalming. What they'll do is they'll embalm the body normally, but they'll follow it with gallon after gallon after gallon of straight phenol, and they won't drain, and it just swells the whole body out and just makes them, I mean, it just bleaches everything, And they don't want the person to look their best. They want to preserve them because medical schools will hold onto a body for several years. And if you've got somebody in training to become a doctor, and they will work through these bodies to a point where they're almost mush, You can't have a situation where the body's almost mush and the family goes, well, we changed our mind, we're gonna have a viewing. Or there's a company that we actually have a table, an Armitage table at the school, and what they do is got the remains of 8 people in it, I think. And it's not actual physical remains in there, it's a digital representation. But what they do is it takes like 6 months. They scrape off like a tiniest little millimeter of skin, and then they record that digitally. Then they do another, then they do another, and they do it through the whole body. And if you're halfway through that, and the family calls up and goes, yeah, we changed our mind. No, there's nothing that can be done. What are you going to do now? So that's the spirit behind the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. And the victim of crimes compensation, you should look into the amounts on this. I am not remembering them off the top of my head. But remember, if somebody is the victim of crime, if somebody's murdered, there are funds out there. It's a fair amount of money. I want to say it's like $7,500, but I don't remember off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that. Damn, my wife would know that. Kills me when she knows more about the funeral business than I do. But it is what it is. Medical waste, right? Remember the idea that every funeral home has to have regulated medical waste. If you have something that is caked through or drenched through with blood, you can't throw that in regular trash. If you're throwing away a scalpel, you can't throw that in the regular trash. It has to go into a sharps container. Technically, everything coming out of the embalming is medical waste. That is regulated medical waste. Although it's going into the drain and you're flushing it away or just going down through a sink, it doesn't matter. You're supposed to keep track of that. Now, they changed the law a little bit a couple of years ago to say, all right, you don't have to report it back to us. I mean, you still have to be a generator. You still have to pay the money to be a generator of regulated medical waste. But if you're doing less than, I think they said 450 calls a year, you don't need to keep track of how much medical waste you're generating per body. Prior to that, and if you're doing more than 450 calls a year, you do have to keep track of all the waste produced from each body. And the way that they do that is there's a chart, a graph that says, okay, the person is this big. Okay, here's essentially how much waste they would generate. We use this many gallons. Here's how much we generated. And based on their size, there's a basic flat rate for aspiration, being the idea that it balances out over time. If you have somebody that's 400 pounds, you're going to aspirate much more out of them than somebody that's 85 pounds. But, over the course of a year, it basically will balance out to the same amount. I think they worked that out like maybe 4.5 pounds per with the aspirate. Based on the person's size, you're supposed to estimate the amount of medical waste generated per. Like we used to have to do at the school, we had to keep a log for every embalming done, and we recorded it all, so we had that figure. Now, I know a lot of funeral homes that would always get that annual form, and they would just change the numbers and make it up. That's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. I'm not calling the state on anybody. I'm not admitting here that I've done that in the past as well. I'm not admitting it. But whatever, you read into that however you'd like. Wills terminology. You just need to know the basics about wills. The executor, the executrix, the administrator, the administratrix. How long does it take? How long before you can probate a will in the state of New Jersey? I know the answer of it. I do know that one, but I'm not going to give it to you. Now, if somebody asks me in the chat, I'll tell you, but I'm not going to. But it's easy enough to look up. All right, prohibited embalming compounds. This is dumb, if you ask me. I did see questions about this when I took, and again, it was a quarter of a century ago. I had a question when I took it. I'm sure this question is no longer used because when I took it, it was all true false. Now it's more multiple choice and stuff. But the one I had read, it is prohibited to use these following compounds in embalming fluid. It was like arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, and in the middle they throw in like something you can use: phenol, antimony, chloral. And then like when you read it to read it fast, like, yeah, they're all bent. Wait a minute, there's one in the middle that wasn't. So the answer was false. Although it read like a true question, it was ridiculous. And I was ticked because I'm like, it's not a reading comprehension test, but whatever. Anyway, these you're not allowed to put into embalming fluid. Again, I don't know why we have to know this. I'm not making embalming fluid. I'm not whipping up a batch of it down in my bathtub or something. Oh, whatever. Yeah, they include it. Arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, chloral, any poisonous alkaloid. Then the statute takes this is all in the reg. The statute extends it, says anything with copper or cyanogen in it. Yeah, you can't use that either. Why we have to know this? I don't know. Whatever. And the communicable diseases: smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus, plague. If you have a body with any of these, you're supposed to notify the Department of Health within 12 hours. Good luck with that. Again, I'm not saying not to do it. You should do it, but I don't know what they would say. And I've never seen a case of any of these. So I like I said, I just had a student in class and she said that they had a body with, I want to say it was yellow fever. Maybe it wasn't plague. Maybe it was yellow fever. And she was like, yeah, we just cremated them and, whatever. I was like, oh, all right, well, yeah, the sky did not fall on them. They didn't lose their licenses. But again, you are supposed to notify the Department of Health within 12 hours. Good. And that's the end of it. Good. All right. I just threw a lot at you there. Anybody have questions or anything? I see Dorothy said hi at 6:56. A little late for me here, but hello back. How many questions are on the test? I don't know. I believe it's 50. That was for your daughter. Oh, okay. You should come on screen. She would have talked to you for like an hour. But anyway, yeah, I believe it's 50 questions, but they won't confirm it for me. It used to be given at Mercer. And it had nothing to do with us. It just geographically we're centered in the state. So the school had a contract with the state board. During COVID, they decided to just take it back up to Newark. So you got to take it up there now. But even when it was at Mercer, I used to try to beg the lady, and I had a good relationship with her. I'm friendly with her at the testing center. I was like, please just leave it out. Just walk out of the room. I won't, as far as you know, I wouldn't even look at it. She wouldn't let me anywhere near it, and rightfully so. But I believe it's 50 questions, but nobody will confirm that for me. And whenever I've talked to students afterwards, I've been like, how did you make out rather than how many questions are it? But I believe it'd be 50. Okay. Good. Any other questions or anything? All right. How long the test takes? It depends on how fast you take it. I think they give you 2 hours to take it. And I see somebody put FTC digital link. The FTC. You're right. Thank you. You see, that fast I forgot. I get to chit chat and I forget. All right, give me 1 second here. Let me find that. I know I have it in here. Preceptor for vocab. No. FTC complying with the funeral rule booklet. I'm going to give you guys two things here, actually. Hold on. Let me get the FTC thing first. More actions. Yes, please work. Wait, no, I don't want to. There we go. Where's the share button? Wait a minute. No, wait, that's my drive, but I should be able to share. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Share. Copy link. Hold on. Let me manage access on this to make sure that everybody has people with access to it. Anyone with the link. Okay, good. All right, let me get back. Let me find you guys. I'm sorry, I have so much stuff open on my computer. All right, so here is the FTC funeral rule booklet, right? That's on my Google Drive. Just grab the link, you can download it. Now, with that in mind, I also wanted to give you folks, okay, wait. Here is also, now this is more for the, manage access, make sure that Anyone with a link, yep. So this is more for the national, but it's good to have regardless. And I'm not sure if everybody at every school's gotten this or whatever. This is the American Board of Funeral Service Education. It's their vocab. It's just a digital copy of it. It's what we give out to the Mercer students. And if you went to a different program, you would have gotten something similar, and probably the same exact thing, just with, the heading on it would say McAllister or Eastwick or whatever. But feel free to take that as well. That's more for the national than for the JP exam, but it comes in handy for either. But yeah, that's more for the national, but I do want everybody to get that. So, and the FTC thing is good for both as well, because the FTC stuff is absolutely open for questions on the jurisprudence exam. I've not heard that there's that much on it, but again, I really have been careful about, what I ask, because I don't want to get accused of farming questions. The YouTube page, let me double check the name on it just to, so I don't give you out the wrong one. Hold on a second here. Let me close that. Boop. Go into the old YouTuber. YouTube. For Pete's sake, just open. And that's not the right one. Which is it under Chrome? Might be under Chrome. Hold on, give me a second. I've got too many accounts because I have a personal account. I don't want to give that out. And there's nothing on that. It's just nerdy stuff. You're like, oh, I think I watched a lot of Star Wars. Yeah, it's at MCCC Funeral Service Program. I'm gonna copy this and let me get back. Here we go. So that's the YouTube page at MCCC Funeral Service Program. And the only things that are made public on that are the reviews. So if you look at it now, you'll see the spring review, which is pretty similar to this, because I really didn't change. There hasn't been a lot of change since the spring, other than that announcement about the NBE. But again, you're welcome to look at them. You're welcome to download them and save them. You're having a hard time going to sleep one night, go ahead and listen to that. Now, I did have a student tell me earlier today that she took a video from class. Like, I recorded one of the class sessions and she dropped it into Notebook on Google and turned it into a podcast. And then she was listening to that, like, I guess on her ride to and from school. And she was like, it was really helpful. It's a new day, man. This is blowing my mind. The stuff that can be done with AI and all this stuff. It's wild. So if you want to do that, feel free. There's no distribution rights on any of these things. Feel free, knock yourself out. Well, good, Dorothy. I'm glad. And my one thing is, I would just say, if you have questions before or after, always feel free to reach out to me. I don't care which school you went to. This is my email address. Always feel free to email me, about anything. But if you are prepping for any of the tests, I don't care where you went to school. If you have a question, feel free to reach out to us. Again, this is one of the reasons they put together the Mortuary Olympics at the convention this past year, was to try to get cooperations between three major programs in the area. Because again, we want everybody to succeed. We don't care where you went to school, man. We just want you to get through and get licensed. So if I can be of any help, please feel free to reach out to me. And all the best on the test. And if you do find out that you passed or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. Dorothy, I graduated Mount Ida back in 2001. Really, Dorothy? So it's been since 2000. Were you licensed between then? You're very welcome to everyone. And again, I'm sorry about the disruption of my children running in and also me having to take a short restroom break, but yeah, it is what it is. So good. All right. If there's no other questions, guys, let's wrap it up and call it a day. This will probably take about an hour to process, and then I'll put it onto the YouTube page. But in the meantime, you're always welcome to look at the other YouTube videos on there. But yeah, take care, folks. And for over 20 years, I live in Maine, and I'm hoping to get back to New Jersey for family. Well, good, Dorothy. All the best to you. And like I said, if you do have questions when you're getting ready for this thing, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm being licensed since 2001, you were saying. It's a long time to then go back and have to take this test and remember all this stuff. So if I can be of any help, or anybody at Mercer, and I'm sure the other programs feel the same, but always feel free to reach out to me, okay? And all the best. I hope everybody passed this thing one and done. And yeah, so good. All right, folks. Take care now.